Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine. And yes, this is the next part of Ben with Gwen. A story about how Ben and Gwen's relationship evolves over the next 4 years following their summer trip. So let's start without any delay. Let's start this great series. March, Year 3. Don't you dare, Ben warned. I'm totally daring, Julie responded. The sounds of them mashing buttons on their controllers got louder and faster. Julie's sumo slammer's character knocked Ben's character into the air, setting him up for the perfect combo. No, 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 no. Ben frantically tried to button mash his way out of it. You ready for this? Don't do it. Doing it. Very quickly, Julie hit a string of button inputs. Her character unleashed a flurry of kicks, punches, and body slams. The first few hit, but then she missed. Oh, shoot. Oh, yes. Ben's character fell free. Acting quickly, he took advantage of Julie's failed attack, hitting her with a combo of his own as a counter-attack. Ha ha. The tables have turned. Off. Julie groaned exaggeratedly, dropping the controller as her character fell over, defeated. Woo. Ben stood up and cheered. Good game, he said, smiling at Julie. You're lucky I missed. You would have been dead. Ben laughed. Yeah, you almost had me there. When did you get so good at this? He asked. You're even better than my cousin. Julie raised an eyebrow. Well, I had to get good at it, she said, giving him a wry smile and sliding closer to him on the couch. 'Cause you're just so cute when you lose. Julie leaned in and gave Ben a quick kiss on the cheek. Hey now, I never lose. And I'm not cute. Ben complained. Of course you are. Julie leaned her head on Ben's shoulder, so he put his arm around her. Ben smiled to himself. He'd been dating Julie for about a month now. During that time, they'd gone on several dates, although there was a serious limit to what 13-year-olds with no money or driver licenses could do for a date. But he enjoyed times like this when they were simply hanging out just as much. It was still amazing to him that Julie actually liked him. After liking her for so long without doing anything about it, her affection had seemed so unattainable. But now, here she was, leaning lovingly on his shoulder. He still remembered how shocked he was the first time she referred to him as her boyfriend. I have a girlfriend. That had been his first thought. He still had trouble believing it, but he couldn't be happier. Julie stood up. I should probably head home soon, she said, looking at her phone. You sure? Ben asked, not wanting her to leave. Yeah. My parents never want me to stay out late on school nights, Julie reminded him. All right, Ben said. So, you wanna do something tomorrow? He asked. Okay, Julie said. No, wait, I've got tennis after school, she remembered. Saturday. Sure, Ben said. Want me to walk you home? He asked as they reached his front door. I'll be fine, Julie said. She leaned in and kissed him on the cheek again. Ben still wasn't used to that either, but he certainly didn't hate it. Bye. She said, turning to leave. Bye, Ben waved to her as she walked away. He closed the door and smiled to himself. I have a girlfriend. Gwen sat at her desk, studiously taking notes as her teacher wrote something on the board. Her hand was cramping, and she had just about filled up yet another page with notes. Gwen liked this class and its teacher, but sometimes even she got overwhelmed by just how much information was being thrown at her. Eventually, the teacher noticed the time and realized the period was ending. She gave a few final words on the lecture and dismissed the class. Gwen let out a deep breath and put her pencil down. She felt tired, so she didn't pack up her things and leave immediately like most of her classmates were doing. Lazily, she leaned her head into her hand and looked out the window. It was a nice day out. The weather had been getting warmer recently as winter came to an end. She wondered what she would do after school. Probably study more. Gwen sighed at that bitter thought. The last week had been nothing but studying for her. She thought it would be nice to do something fun instead, especially on a Friday, but she knew she'd have nothing better to do. Hey! A voice from beside her brought Gwen out of her thoughts. Gwen turned her head. Emily had rolled up next to her. Oh! Hey, Emily, she greeted her. She must not have sounded very happy to see her, because Emily looked at her with concern. You all right, Gwen? She asked. Home. Gwen sat up straight and tried to shake off her drowsiness. Yeah, I'm fine. You sure? Seems like you've been kinda down lately. Something wrong? Gwen shook her head. No. I don't think so, anyway. She stood up and started packing her things into her backpack. Some annoying guys hitting on you? Emily asked, not dropping the subject. Gwen looked at Emily, then averted her eyes, embarrassed. No more than usual, she said quietly. She still had random guys coming up to her and trying to talk to her now and then, and she had become more self-conscious about the issue ever since Lucy told her why she thought they were so into her. All too often she found herself looking over her shoulder to see if anyone was looking at her. Gwen and Emily left the classroom and headed down the hall to their next class. How's your cousin? Emily asked. Gwen flinched a little, but otherwise kept a blank face and kept walking. She shrugged. I don't know. Why? Just making conversation, Emily said. You usually keep me updated on all his crazy escapades. Do I really talk about him that much? Throughout her next class, Gwen couldn't focus very well. After Emily had brought him up, she couldn't get her mind off of Ben and how annoyed she was with him right now. Lately, every time she wanted to hang out with him, he was either busy or he would cancel at the last minute. There had been plenty of days when she'd gotten a text from him after school telling her he wouldn't be able to make it today, sometimes when she was already halfway to the park. Some days he'd forgotten to tell her altogether, or at least it seemed like he did, since Gwen would be the one to text him asking if they were meeting that day. And every time he cancelled, he'd say he was hanging out with Julie, or he had a date with Julie, or he was playing tennis with Julie. I'm so sick of Julie this and Julie that. She was tired of hearing about Julie, and she was definitely tired of Ben trying to subtly brag about having a girlfriend by name-dropping her all the time. Gwen thought it was childish and annoying. So like him. By her next class, she was able to get Ben out of her mind and return her focus to her schoolwork. However, halfway through the class, she felt her phone vibrate. She wondered who would be texting her right now, but she didn't check her phone since students weren't allowed to use them in class. Despite all the influence Ben had had on her over the years, she still didn't like breaking school rules, even minor ones like that. After class let out, Gwen remembered she had a text as she was walking down the hall. She took her phone out of her pocket and checked the message. It was from Ben. What does he want? She opened the message and read it. Wanna hang out tonight? It said. Gwen stopped walking and stared at her phone. She was still annoyed with him, but it had been nearly a week since the last time they'd hung out. Not that I'm so desperate to see him. Gwen tried to tell herself that as she typed her response. Sure was her simple answer. But I don't have anything better to do, right? She kept walking. A moment later, her phone vibrated again. Another message from Ben. Cool. See you after school. She put her phone away. Despite her annoyance, a slight smile spread across her face. When Ben spotted her, he thought Gwen looked annoyed. She was staring off into the distance like she was contemplating something that was bothering her. Ben knew that look pretty well. Wonder what's up with her. Earlier that day, he had decided to send Gwen a text to ask her if she wanted to hang out. That sort of communication had only become necessary recently. Since he'd started hanging out with Julie more, it was no longer considered a given that he and Gwen would be spending time together after school. Although he tried to let her know his plans early enough, he sometimes screwed up, or things changed at the last minute. He felt bad whenever that happened, so he'd decided to text her hours before school ended this time. That way, he wouldn't piss off Gwen. Seeing the way she looked now, Ben thought it might not have worked so well. However, to Ben's surprise, Gwen's expression changed as soon as she spotted him. Hey! She happily called out as she waved to him. Ben waved back as he walked closer, and Gwen started jogging towards him to meet him halfway. Sup, dweeb? Ben greeted her once they had closed the gap between them. What are you so excited about? He asked, curious. What? Gwen seemed a little caught off guard. Nothing, she said, denying it. Ben looked at her funny, but he shrugged it off. So, what do you wanna do? He asked. Gwen smiled proudly and reached into her shirt to pull out her charm necklace. I have got to show you how much progress I've made on this thing, she said, dangling it from her hand. You've been working on it some more. Awesome. Yeah, show me, Ben said excitedly. Gwen looked around, noticing other people in the park. Sure, but not here. Your dad still got that weight set? Yeah. Not like he ever uses it, though. Great. Let's go. Ben could tell she was excited to show off just how strong she was now, and he was quite curious to see what she could do as well. Back at Ben's house, they checked to make sure Ben's parents weren't home. They were still completely ignorant to the magic/alien side of their lives, and they wanted to keep it that way. Once they were certain they were in the clear, Ben showed Gwen to his father's weight room. Okay, he said, picking up a small, 5-pound dumbbell. Lift this with the stone. He placed it on the ground in front of Gwen. She smirked. Easy. With a flick of her hand, the dumbbell lifted itself into the air and hovered there. The charm of telekinesis, which Gwen was now wearing above her shirt, lit up with a bluish glow along the lines etched into it. Gwen made a twirling gesture with her finger, and the dumbbell began to spin. She folded her arms confidently as it continued to twirl in midair. Whoa, cool. Ben said in amazement. He'd seen Gwen lift things with magic before, but not like this. The fact that Gwen wasn't making any hand gestures at the moment showed she could control it simply with her thoughts. Gwen smiled at Ben's reaction, like she was glad she could impress him so much. She glanced at the dumbbell, allowing it to stop spinning and float harmlessly to the floor. Gimme something heavier, she challenged. You got it, Ben complied, grabbing another dumbbell, this one weighing 50 pounds. He had a little trouble picking it up, but he managed to bring it over and put it down in front of her. Gwen smirked. She nodded her head upwards once, and the 50-pound weight lifted into the air almost as quickly as the 5-pound one had. Ben walked up to the floating dumbbell. He moved his hands all around it. "Ladies and gentlemen, no strings," he said, talking like a stage magician. Gwen laughed, then put the weight down. "Now watch this," she said. She sat down cross-legged on the floor, closed her eyes, and held up her hands in a meditative pose, although she was still smirking. The charm on her necklace glowed brightly, and she slowly began to rise off of the ground. Ben stared in amazement. Like moving objects with magic, Ben had seen Gwen fly around on magic discs before, but this was something else. Gwen opened her eyes and was delighted to see the stunned look on her cousin's face. "Pretty cool, huh?" she said. She stood up like she normally would, still not touching the ground. Now she stood in place, crossing her arms and gently bobbing slightly as she floated in the air. Ben looked at her with genuine admiration. "Gwen, you're amazing," he said. Gwen smiled shyly. Then, suddenly, she sort of stumbled in the air. Losing her concentration, she dropped to the floor. Her feet landed unevenly and she lost her balance, causing her to topple over backwards, falling flat on her butt. "Ow!" she screamed. Ben, who had stood there watching the whole time, continued to stare for a moment. Then he erupted with laughter. "But you're still a dweeb," he said, stepping forward and holding out his hand to help her up. Gwen could have just levitated herself back to her feet, but she took Ben's hand anyway and let him help her up. "You could have caught me before I fell," Gwen complained. "Yeah, but then I wouldn't have gotten to see you fall." Ben grinned at her. Gwen huffed and turned away from him. "Jerk." Ben wasn't fazed. "So, how much more work does that one need?" he asked. Gwen lifted up the charm on her necklace. "I'm not sure," she said. Characaster's spellbook didn't have a complete description on the process, and I haven't found too much on it elsewhere. But at the moment, it seems like it's almost at full strength." "Awesome," Ben said. "Which one are you gonna rebuild next?" Gwen thought hard for a moment. Ben wasn't sure why, but that question seemed to have made her anxious. "I'm not sure," Gwen said. "I don't really need all of them, right? 1 or 2 should make me strong enough to fight anything we go up against." Ben thought of all the villains and monsters they'd fought over the years. Even without the charms, she was able to handle them all, sometimes even without him and his Omnitrix around to help her. "Does your spellbook not say how to remake all the others?" Ben asked. "Well, it probably does, but..." Gwen thought of how to say this. "I destroyed them because I thought they were too powerful, and so no one like Hex could ever use them again. If I made a whole new set of them, I'd be making it possible for something like that to happen." "Nonsense," Ben said. "They'll be in good hands. Besides, think of the charms like my Omnitrix." Ben held up his watch arm and started flipping through his aliens. "The more aliens I add to this thing, the more powerful it gets. It sure would suck if some bad guys got a hold of it, but that's not gonna happen, because I've got it. So why shouldn't I keep collecting aliens until I've got them all?" "I didn't realize we were going by Pokemon logic here," Gwen said. Ben laughed at that. He turned the dial on the Omnitrix and flipped through Wildvine, Heat Blast, and Rapiers. Grass, fire, water. Wow, damn. I got any dragon types in here yet? Gwen smiled, but she quickly got serious again. You really think I should try to recreate all 5 charms? Of course I do, Ben said. The more magic you get, and the more aliens I get, the more we can save the world. Ben posed triumphantly with the Omnitrix. So, what do you say? Gwen thought about it some more. She definitely still seemed to be somewhat against the idea. Well, maybe one more. I've always kind of wished I'd kept the charm of luck, she said. It would be nice to be the real lucky girl again. Cool, Ben said. Tomorrow I'll show you the magic shop where I found that one, Ben said, pointing to the stone on Gwen's necklace. Maybe they'll have more, or know where to find them. Gwen looked at him funny. You want to hang out again tomorrow? She asked. Ben looked confused. Sure, why not? You busy? No, Gwen said, a little too quickly and a little too loudly. No, I'm free. Yeah, let's do that tomorrow, she said. Ben thought Gwen was acting kind of weird, but he shrugged it off. So, what next? You wanna juggle some chainsaws with your mind? Ben asked. How about we do something else with a better chance of us walking away with all our limbs attached? Gwen suggested. Or, you're no fun. Later that night, Gwen went up to her room in a good mood. After showing off her newfound magical prowess to Ben for a while, the two of them had played games like they usually did when they hung out until Gwen's parents got home. Ben stayed for dinner, and then Gwen's dad drove him home. Compared to the last week of doing practically nothing but schoolwork and extracurriculars, it was the most fun she'd had in a while. Plus, she was gonna hang out with Ben again tomorrow. Something was bothering her, though. To Gwen, it felt like it had been a long time since they'd last spent a lot of time together, but Ben hadn't seemed to notice at all. When they met up early that day, Ben had acted like he'd just seen her a day or two ago. There was no long time, no see or it's good to see you again, from him. At dinner, Gwen's father had even commented on the fact that he hadn't seen Ben around here for a while, yet Ben had almost no response to that at all. The more Gwen thought about it, the more her good mood faded. No matter how much she tried not to, she thought about Ben constantly on the days they didn't see each other. She spent her time focusing on her schoolwork, but the whole time she was wishing she was hanging out with her best friend doing something fun instead. But the way Ben had acted today. It's like he doesn't think about me at all. Gwen sighed. She was worried things would turn out like this with Ben dating Julie. Despite Ben's just one-day promises, it seemed like Julie got to see Ben every day. Gwen was jealous of her for that. She tensed up. No. Quit being so clingy. Gwen tried to snap herself out of it. It's his time, he can spend it however he wants for all I care. Besides, I get him today and tomorrow, don't I? She felt weird. She wasn't even sure exactly how she was feeling, but it was very uncomfortable. She tried to look on the bright side to bring her good mood back. Today was fun. I hung out with Ben. I'm hanging out with him again tomorrow. And I might get to be lucky girl again soon. Gwen smiled. As she got ready for bed, she stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself, holding up the charm of telekinesis and admiring it before she took it off. She felt a surge of pride coursing through her as she remembered what Ben had said to her earlier that day. Gwen, you're amazing. She felt warm and tingly inside. The moment he said that, it was like all the hard work she'd put into making the charm had paid off. A wave of embarrassment swept over her. It's not like I did it for him. Gwen shook her head. She realized she was overthinking everything, just like she always did. She assured herself that everything was fine. She just needed to get some sleep. "Are you sure it was at this mall?" Gwen asked. "This is literally the only mall in Bellwood," Ben responded. The two of them had been wandering around the mall all afternoon in search of the magic shop where Ben had found the stone he'd given to Gwen. They might have found it earlier, but they kept getting distracted by other things. Earlier, they'd played each other in a demo for a new video game that was set up in a game store. Ben ended up buying a copy. After that, Gwen wanted to buy some new clothes, all of which she had to try on before deciding to buy just a couple of things. Most recently, they'd stopped by a pretzel stand, and they were both munching on gigantic cinnamon pretzels as they continued their search. "Here's a map," Gwen said, directing Ben's attention to a large map of the mall. "Do you remember the name of it?" Ben shook his head. He examined the map, looking for anything that sounded like a magic shop. "What about this one?" Gwen pointed to a number on the map and to the matching number on the legend. Ben stepped up next to her to see where she was pointing, then leaned in closer to read the name of the store. When he did, Gwen jumped back and held up her hands for a second before rigidly dropping them to her side. "What's wrong?" Ben asked, stepping back. "Nothing," Gwen said, snapping her attention back to the map, still standing more than an arm's length from Ben. Ben looked at her in confusion. Why's she acting so jumpy today? Throughout the day, there had been several other moments like this. Everything would seem perfectly normal, but then Gwen would suddenly get jumpy and awkward. She'd been especially weird while she was trying on clothes. She would step out of the changing room and ask him what he thought, then usually before he could even answer, she would say something like "whatever, I didn't like this one anyway," and go back inside to change. He'd all but given up on understanding it. "Wait, I think I remember where it was," Ben said. He pointed to a number on the map. "I can't remember the name of it, but I remember it was near this store here." He quickly led her through the mall to the store he was talking about, trying to avoid any other distractions so they could get there before he forgot. "Okay, this looks familiar," he said, looking around. "I'm pretty sure it was right on the corner there." "That one?" Gwen asked, looking where he was pointing. "Yes, definitely. It was that one," Ben said. The two of them excitedly ran towards the store, but once they got in front of it, they stopped. It was closed, and more importantly, it looked like it had been closed for a long time. "What the hell?" Ben asked. The store had no sign on it. The door was blocked by a metal security gate. The windows were barred, but they could look through them. There were shelves in the same layout Ben remembered from 3 months ago, but they were all completely bare. "You sure this was the place?" Gwen asked skeptically. "Yes, this is definitely it," Ben insisted. "Looks like they went out of business," Gwen said, peering through the barred windows. "Out of business?" Ben said. "More like dropped off the face of the planet. I think I might have bought you a cursed present from a witch or something." "Yeah, this definitely seems like some Twilight Zone/Ray Bradbury stuff going on here," Gwen said. "We've run into stranger things." She pulled her necklace out of her shirt and looked at the charm. "Maybe it was irresponsible of me to keep this in the first place. Magic is dangerous enough already, and not knowing where it came from just makes it that much worse." No, Ben said. "The stone is fine. If there was anything wrong with it, I'm sure everything you've done to it must have fixed it by now." Gwen looked skeptical. Do you remember anything about the person who sold it to you? Ben shrugged. Some older dude. Didn't seem like bad guy material. Well, he sells you an actual magic item and then disappears without a trace, Gwen said. For all we know, you bought me a birthday present from the devil himself. Hey, I'm not that bad at picking out gifts. Ben protested. Besides, if it was cursed, something bad would have happened already, right? Gwen put her thumb and forefinger to her chin. Well, in these kinds of stories, the cursed object would do something cool, but then the cool thing would ironically end up causing something bad. Like a pair of shoes that make you run really fast, but then you can't stop and end up running into traffic. Gwen held up her necklace again. What if I use this to levitate one day, and I don't stop going up until I'm in outer space? Ben laughed. Yeah, better watch your step. Wouldn't wanna trip and fall up into the sky. Gwen smiled. Well, I don't think I should actually be that worried, though. I think I've read enough about cursed objects in Characaster's spellbook to know how to spot them. Oh, good. Ben nodded. Shame about this place, though. Guess we'll have to look someplace else for another possible charm of Bezel. I guess so, Gwen agreed. All right, wanna go to that ice cream place next? Ben asked. I'll buy. Sure, Gwen said. She looked at him sort of strangely. Ben wasn't sure what she was thinking. She looked like she was looking forward to it, but also like she was being shy about something. Okay, Ben said, shrugging it off. Let's go. Ben and Gwen ended up spending another hour at the mall. After that, they decided to go back to Ben's house to hang out and watch a few episodes of a show Lucy had suggested to them. I'm not sure I'm gonna like this season as much, Gwen commented after an episode. Really? I love it so far. There's a lot of cool new characters, and the fight scenes were ridiculously awesome, Ben said, disagreeing. Yeah, some of them are good. I just don't like how they skipped forward, like, 5 years between seasons. I feel like we missed out on a lot of important character development, Gwen explained. Meh. Ben waved his hand dismissively. Couldn't have been that important if they skipped over it. Gwen was going to say something in response, but Ben's phone buzzed. He took it out, saw a text message, and typed out a response. Your parents? Gwen asked. No, Ben said, putting his phone back in his pocket. Julie. Making plans for tomorrow. Oh, Gwen said. She'd been hoping she would get to spend the whole weekend with him, and now she hoped her disappointment wasn't showing. Cassie looks so much like Lucy, Ben said, getting back to their discussion about the show. What? Oh, yeah. Different hair though, Gwen said. Hey, listen, Gwen tried to change the subject to something more important. Ben looked at her questioningly. Well, I have a karate tournament next weekend, she said. It's the first big one of the season. You wanna come? Grandpa's gonna be there. She asked the question as casually as she could, but she tried to convey with her eyes how much she wanted him to be there. Ben looked apologetic, and Gwen immediately knew what he was going to say. Sorry. I already have plans with Julie next weekend, too, he said. Please? Gwen asked, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. It's just, this is kind of a big deal for me, since I'm so close to my black belt. And we haven't seen each other much lately, you know. She decided to just come out and say it, hoping he'd realize it and change his mind. Ben raised an eyebrow in confusion. What do you mean? We spent the last 2 days together. Yeah, but until yesterday, I hadn't seen you at all for like a week. Gwen insisted. What? There's no way it's been that long, Ben said, counting on his fingers. Didn't we hang out on Tuesday? We were going to, but you made plans with Julie at the last minute. Gwen hadn't really meant to put emphasis on Julie's name like that, and she hoped she hadn't sounded too hostile. Oh, Ben said, remembering that day. He thought back to the last week. Huh. I guess I didn't notice, he said. Gwen felt a pain in her chest when he said that, but she brushed it off. Yeah. So it's kinda been a while. And I'm guessing you're gonna be spending most of the next week hanging out with Julie again, too, right? Well, yeah. Probably. I mean, she's my girlfriend, Ben said, not trying to hide how proud he was to say that. Gwen rolled her eyes. So could you maybe free up next Saturday for me at least? Please? She asked, trying not to beg too much. Ben considered it. He must have been able to tell how serious Gwen was about this. I guess, he said eventually. We don't have anything big planned, so maybe Julie won't mind cancelling. Gwen smiled and felt a wave of relief wash over her. Before she could stop herself, she threw herself at him in a hug. Thank you, she said. Heh. Yeah. No problem, Ben said, his voice cracking. After a moment, Gwen realized she'd probably been hugging him for longer than was normal. She pulled herself out of the hug and, without meaning to, shoved Ben back a little. Gwen cleared her throat. Yes. Right. Thank you, she said. Even as best friends, they still hadn't quite gotten the hang of hugging. Neither of them said anything for a moment. So, Ben said, breaking the silence. Next episode. He gestured to the TV, which was still paused at the end of the last episode. Yeah, okay, Gwen agreed. Cool. Let me go make some more popcorn first, Ben said, excusing himself from the room and heading to his kitchen. Okay. Once Ben was out of the room, Gwen thought about his agreement to come to her karate tournament next Saturday. Even though she was still a little upset that she wouldn't get to hang out with him again tomorrow and probably most of the next week, she smiled to herself. Good job. As planned, Ben spent most of Sunday with Julie. They went to the pier, saw a movie, and hung out at Julie's house. The whole time, Ben was putting off telling her that he'd have to cancel their plans for next Saturday. He felt kind of guilty since he had made the decision without asking her, and he wasn't sure how she would react. Hope she won't be too mad. Ben. Julie said, waving a hand in his face. Huh? What? Ben said, snapping out of his thoughts. You all right? Julie asked. You kinda spaced out just now. Oh. Sorry. From the way she looked at him, he could tell she knew something was bugging him, but she didn't press him on it. Ben was about to do the same thing and maybe put off telling her about his change of plans until tomorrow or the next day. But he decided he should do it now. Like ripping off a band-aid. Hey, Julie. He said. Julie turned to look at him. You know how we had plans for next weekend? He asked, already looking apologetic. Yeah. Julie said, allowing him to continue. Well, my cousin kinda has a karate tournament on Saturday. And she wants me to come watch her compete. So, you mind if we cancel for that day? Ben left out the fact that he'd already agreed to go to Gwen's tournament, hoping he wouldn't have to say so at all. He gave his best apologetic grimace, waiting for Julie's response. He was expecting her to be upset. "Sure," Julie said. "Sure," Ben repeated in surprise. "Yeah, no problem," Julie said. She smiled. "How long's she been doing karate?" she asked out of curiosity. Since we were 7, I think," Ben said. "Cool. Is she a black belt?" Julie asked. "No, not yet." Ben was surprised at how well she was taking this. But then he thought, she'd always seemed pretty level-headed, especially compared to himself, and especially compared to Gwen. Maybe he was being stupid for expecting her to be pissed off. "Can I come, too?" Julie asked. "To Gwen's tournament?" "Yeah. A karate tournament sounds like it would be fun to watch. Plus, I still haven't met your cousin." "Wait, really?" That came as a surprise to Ben. He thought back to the past year. He'd spent so much time with Gwen and so much time with Julie, he could have sworn they'd already run into each other at some point. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask Gwen," he said. "Okay." Julie smiled. She went back to what she was doing. Ben stopped to think about what it would be like when Gwen and Julie finally met. Would they get along? As far as Ben was concerned, they were both brainiacs, they both loved to beat him at everything, and they both had a weird mix of tomboy and girly girl to them. In many ways, they were a lot alike. He instantly regretted having that thought. "No. My girlfriend is nothing like my cousin." Since Julie had taken the news so well, Ben was inspired to stick with the ask right away strategy when asking Gwen if Julie could come to her karate tournament as well. He couldn't imagine a reason why she wouldn't want Julie to come with him, and it was probably a public event anyway. Plus, Julie seemed interested in meeting Gwen, so maybe Gwen would want to meet her too. He decided to call her when he got home from Julie's that night. After a couple rings, she answered. "Hey," Gwen said through the phone. "What's up?" "Hey, Gwen. I just got a quick question about your tournament," Ben said. "Oh, cool. What do you wanna know?" Gwen sounded excited to talk about it. "Can I bring Julie?" he asked. It was a simple yes or no question, but for some reason it took Gwen a moment to respond. "Gwen?" Ben asked after a few seconds of silence, unsure if the call was going through. No. "No, sorry, I don't think you can do that," she said. She didn't sound as excited anymore. "What? Why not?" Ben asked. "Well, we were told we could just invite our families. There's a maximum capacity that they don't wanna hit, so, I don't think she can come." Gwen didn't sound very sure of herself. That sucks," Ben said, disappointed. "Yeah. I guess. Sorry," Gwen apologized. "Nah, it's all right," Ben said. "Thanks anyway. Guess I'll see you." "Wait." Gwen interrupted him. Ben pulled the phone away from his ear for a second, surprised at the sudden outburst. Yeah?" he asked. Gwen said. "While I have you, you wanna hang out after school tomorrow?" she asked. Ben hadn't actually made any concrete plans with Julie for tomorrow yet, so he agreed. "Sure, I'm up for that. Meet you at the usual place." "Cool," Gwen said. "All right, I'll see you tomorrow, then." "Cool. Night, dweeb." Night, doofus. Ben hung up. He wondered if Julie would be upset that she couldn't come to Gwen's tournament after all. Nah. She'll understand. April, Year 3. After coming to the realization that he'd been neglecting Gwen in favor of Julie, Ben decided the best thing he could do was try to make time for both of them. Most weeks, this meant switching off who he spent time with each day, or making plans with one of them after making plans with the other. For the most part, Ben thought he was doing a good job of this. Gwen certainly seemed much happier, although her mood was never very predictable. Still, he was spending time with both of them. But that didn't stop Julie from giving him that look, the one she'd started giving him whenever he had to turn down or cancel plans with her in order to do something else with Gwen. She hadn't done it at first, but after turning her down 2 or 3 times over the last few weeks, she'd started to act like she was hurt but trying not to show it. At first, Ben ignored it. He'd learned from Gwen that he wasn't the best at reading people, so he figured he'd better not risk reading into it too much and creating a problem where none existed. But she kept doing it. No matter how much he wished he could just ignore it, Ben kept getting the feeling that Julie was upset with him. Does she want me to spend even more time with her? Does she not like me spending so much time with another girl, even if that girl happens to be my cousin? Am I just totally oblivious to whatever's really going on? This came up again one day when he and Julie were hanging out after school at her house and Julie tried to make weekend plans with him again. So, I was thinking, maybe we should get together to study for our science test on Monday. We could do something else beforehand too. I don't expect to spend the whole weekend studying. Unfortunately, as had been the case so often lately, Ben had to turn her down. Sorry, but I already have plans with Gwen for Saturday and Sunday, he said with an apologetic grimace. Julie gave him that look again, and this time, she noticeably sighed. She even looked a little sad. I know, I'm sorry. Ben decided to finally ask. It really bothers you when I do that, doesn't it? Julie met his gaze. Even though his question was kind of nonspecific, she knew what he was asking about. Ben, are you avoiding me? What? Ben asked, a little taken aback. How could she possibly think I've been avoiding her? What the heck are you talking about? Well, Julie spoke. She seemed nervous, like she was about to broach a very uncomfortable subject. For the last few weeks, you've been turning me down a lot, and you always say it's to hang out with your cousin. Is that just an excuse? Like, am I being super clingy and trying to spend too much time with you or something? What? No. Ben face-palmed and leaned his head back exasperatedly. He groaned. Why is this so hard? Julie looked at him questioningly. That isn't an excuse, Ben said. I really was hanging out with Gwen all those times. But you've been doing it more and more lately, Julie said. Are you sure you're not, like, getting bored of me? No. Not at all. Ben put his hands on Julie's shoulders. They looked into each other's eyes. Julie, you're awesome. I'm never gonna get bored of you. Okay. She smiled at him. Okay. I believe you. He hugged her for a moment, then took a step back. And you're right, Julie said. I am awesome. Ben laughed. Damn right. Almost as awesome as me. Ben had been able to handle Julie's concerns, but later that day, he got worried. Am I spending too much time with Gwen now? He thought he'd been dividing his free time about 50-50 at this point, but maybe he was slightly favoring Gwen. Or maybe 50-50 wasn't enough for Julie. He'd never had a girlfriend before, so he had no idea how much attention he was supposed to be giving her. But regardless, the way he was doing things now was hurting Julie. In order to keep that from happening, he was going to have to do something for her that would demonstrate how important she was to him, and he decided that meant cancelling his plans with Gwen for the weekend to free up time for her. He knew immediately that Gwen would hate that decision. He hated it too, despite it being his idea. Gwen had already gotten upset once before when Ben wasn't spending enough time with her. At least back then, Ben's excuse was he just hadn't realized it. This time, not only would he know what he was doing, he'd be doing it on purpose. He knew that would make things a whole lot worse. Ben didn't come to this decision easily. Even after he did, it still felt wrong. But what it came down to was, what's more important, a girlfriend or a cousin? Ben figured he was supposed to choose his girlfriend over anyone. He was still very new to the whole dating thing, but from what he understood, it seemed like the whole point of it was to pick one person to put before everyone else. To him, that made sense. Well, I guess that's just the way it's gotta be. Up until Friday night, Gwen remained blissfully unaware of what Ben was planning. She'd invited him over at her house, and the two of them were sitting on the couch in her living room, discussing an episode of a TV show they'd just finished. I still don't get why he said that, Ben said, referring to a cryptic line one of the characters had spoken near the end of the episode. They probably explain it in the next episode, Gwen said. You wanna watch it now? Ben hesitated. Just a sec, he said. I just remembered I have something to tell you. Oh yeah? Gwen tilted her head slightly. What is it? She asked curiously. I'm not really gonna be able to hang out this weekend, he said. What? Gwen looked at him in disappointed confusion. Why not? I've got plans with Julie, he said. You what? Since when? Gwen asked, eyes narrowed, a hint of anger in her voice. A couple days ago. But we made plans for this weekend last weekend, Gwen complained. Why didn't you just tell her you were busy? Because she's my girlfriend, Ben stated. Oh, Lord. Gwen made a show of rolling her eyes and looking very annoyed at that statement. I'm supposed to spend time with her, he insisted. Ben, we've been through this already, Gwen reminded him. You already hang out with her so much as it is. The least you could do is keep the plans you've already made with me. Hey, I've hung out with you a lot recently, Ben argued. If I'm really gonna get serious with Julie, I've gotta start acting like it. Gwen rolled her eyes again. Yeah, I'm sure serious is what you wanna get with her. You can spend time with her without totally ditching me like this, Gwen pointed out, glaring at him now. Well, I'm sorry, but that's just how it's gotta be, Ben said. I have to think of my relationship with her. Ben, just how real do you think your stupid middle school relationship is? Gwen interrupted him. Ben glared at her and hung his mouth open in shock. Fuck you, he said, standing up. You know what? You're just jealous. What? Gwen was stunned for a moment. What are you, what do you mean by, what? She stuttered. Her face turned bright red with a mix of anger and confused panic. Seeing Gwen's reaction, Ben's face went red too. I mean because you don't have a boyfriend. He shouted, trying to recover. You're just pissed because I can get a girl and you can't get a guy. Oh, shut up, you obnoxious, self-absorbed little narcissist. Gwen shot back. You think you're special just because some random girl from your school can put up with your bullshit for more than 30 seconds. I am special. Ben held up his arm and pointed to the Omnitrix. Remember this? Yeah, she doesn't even know about it. Even plain old Bellwood Ben is good enough for her. So, yeah, I'd say I'm pretty goddamn special. Gwen threw her hands up and lolled her head exasperatedly. You're so fucking in love with yourself, it's a wonder you bother dating at all. Ben groaned. I don't need this, he said, standing up. Where are you going? Gwen asked angrily as Ben headed for the door. I'm outta here, he called back. Not again. Ben. Gwen shouted loudly enough to stop him in his tracks. He turned back around. We talked about this. Ben still looked angry, but he squinted questioningly. What? We promised we wouldn't do this anymore. Gwen angrily reminded him. It took him a moment, but Ben seemed to realize what she meant. He turned and looked at the door behind him, then back at Gwen, like he was debating which way he should go. We. He groaned in frustration. Fine. We'll talk about this later. For now, I am done. He turned back around and marched out of the room. No, you're not. Ben. Get back, Ben. Gwen followed him to the front door and watched him walk outside, slamming the door behind him. Gwen stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where Ben had stood. Unexpectedly, she began to tear up. She stumbled back over to the couch and fell to her knees in front of it, trying to get a hold of herself. Crying now, she slammed her fist repeatedly onto the couch, then stood up and started kicking it. Stupid, 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 stupid. She repeated with each kick. Gwen finally stopped and let out a loud, angry scream. She fell to her knees once again, laying her head on the seat of the couch in front of her, sobbing into the cushions. Why? The next morning, Ben woke up feeling groggy, having not slept very well. Almost immediately, he remembered the fight he'd had with Gwen the day before, which had been on his mind all night as he tossed and turned, trying to get to sleep. Stupid Gwen. How real do I think my stupid middle school relationship is? What does that even mean? As far as Ben was concerned, acting all high and mighty like that was so typical of Gwen. It was like she'd forgotten she was in middle school too. He didn't see how she could have such a low view of dating already. She's just being bitter about it because she couldn't get a boyfriend. Ben couldn't help himself from thinking about that. Can Gwen really not get a date? She's smart. And badass. And pretty. Nope, Ben said out loud to himself, sitting up in his bed. He shook the idea out of his mind, then fell back onto his pillow with a groan. What am I doing complimenting her anyway? I'm supposed to be mad, here. Pretty quickly, he could feel the guilt setting in. Even though he was still pretty sure he was right about everything, and Gwen had said some things that had really pissed him off, he knew he had his share of the blame as well. This whole fight had started because of his decision to change his plans with her. Maybe that was wrong. Plus, he'd also insulted her pretty severely. Ben rolled over and sighed. Last night, he had planned to call Julie in the morning. The whole point of cancelling his plans with Gwen was to hang out with Julie instead, after all. But he didn't really feel up to it. He was frustrated, angry, and feeling guilty. For a while, he even considered going back to Gwen's to apologize and hang out with her like they'd originally planned. No. I can't let her win. And so, unable to bring himself to see either of them that day, he ended up staying home alone. I hope you're happy, dweeb. Gwen's day didn't go much better. She stayed home all day too, mostly studying or watching TV. She constantly had bitter thoughts about how she could be doing something fun with Ben right now instead of sitting around being bored, but no. Ben had to ruin it. All for the sake of that girlfriend of his. He cares more about her than he does about me. The thought struck her all of a sudden as she was reviewing some of her notes from school. She felt a tremendous pang of sadness, which made her unconsciously pull her arms into her chest and lay her head down on the table. He will not make me cry again. Gwen sat back up. She still couldn't believe it. She and Ben had been on good terms for quite some time now. They'd spent years building up a friendship, and they'd even risked life and limb for one another on several occasions. But apparently none of that can compete with some random girl he's only known for less than a year. All Gwen knew about Julie is what Ben had told her. Of course, pretty much all Ben said about her was how great she was, which got old really fast. What could she possibly have that makes him like her so much? Gwen blushed as she thought of a few obvious answers to that question. Gross, she said, cringing at her own thoughts. She tried to get her mind back on track, considering what she could do about the situation. She considered calling or texting Ben, but she knew he wouldn't answer. He was probably with Julie right now. What would I even say? Not to mention, she was still mad at him, and he was most likely still mad at her. She wasn't petty enough to call him just to continue their argument over the phone, and she was too petty to apologize this quickly. She glanced over at a framed picture of her and Ben on her desk. She sighed and tilted the picture over so it was face down on the table. Why are you so good at making me feel bad? By Sunday, Ben was sick and tired of moping around. He was supposed to be a man of action. That meant making a decision and following through on it, not sitting around considering his options and doing nothing like he'd done the previous day. Right now, he had to decide to either hang out with Julie or make up with Gwen. Making up with Gwen would go against his goal of spending more time with his girlfriend, whereas hanging out with Julie would accomplish exactly what he'd set out to do before this whole mess had started. I guess the answer is simple. He pulled out his phone and called his girlfriend. After a few rings, Julie picked up. Ben? She asked, sounding surprised that he was calling. Hey, Julie. You busy today? Ben asked. Well, no, but aren't you? Well, no, actually. Ben felt a pang of guilt as he said that, but he ignored it and went on. Turns out I'm gonna have most of the day to myself. You wanna meet up and go do something? Sure. Julie answered immediately, sounding happy. But I can't stay out too late tonight because we have that test tomorrow. Oh, yeah. That. Ben wasn't exactly happy to hear that reminder. We can study together, Julie suggested, knowing Ben probably wouldn't study much on his own. She'd been helping him a lot in school lately. Yeah, okay. But let's do something fun first. Ben reminded her. Yeah, totally. You wanna come over to my place, and then we'll head out somewhere? Julie suggested. I'll be there in no time, Ben said. Great. See you in a bit, then. Yeah, see you in a bit. They both hung up. Ben smiled as he considered going XLR8 just so he could actually be there in no time, but he decided against it. If he showed up at her house like 2 seconds after getting off the phone with her, She'd think he'd been waiting outside while they were talking, which would probably be weird. As he went around his room getting his things together, he glanced over at his bedside table. The charmed locket Gwen had given him for their birthday sat on top of it. He usually wore it all the time, but he'd taken it off to sleep and hadn't put it back on yet. Seeing Gwen's gift automatically made him think of her again. He picked up the locket and opened it, taking a moment to stare at the picture inside. It almost made him change his plans yet again, considering the possibility of working things out with Gwen right now instead. But he closed the locket and shook his head. He'd made his decision. Nonetheless, he slipped the locket around his neck and let it hang beneath his shirt. I told her we'd talk about it. And we will. Just not now. On Thursday, Gwen walked out of her karate class late in the evening. Like she often did, she headed to Mr. Smoothie. As she walked through the door, she couldn't help but be reminded of all the times she'd come here with Ben. The thought made her bitter. Ben hadn't contacted her at all since their fight. All week, she'd been alone, hoping for some sort of apology or some attempt to move on, but she hadn't heard anything from him. If he's not gonna apologize, then neither am I. That had been her mindset since last weekend. As a result, neither of them had made any attempt to make up with the other. Gwen spent each day after school by herself, even days when she knew Ben should be free. So far, the week had been boring, and her bitterness towards Ben was only growing into resentment. The insulting things he'd said to her would echo in her mind whenever she considered giving in and being the one to break their silence. He thinks he's so special just because he's dating someone. That was really starting to get to her too. Ben seemed to think it was impossible that any guy would want to date her. She knew he was wrong, but it still hurt to know he found her undateable. Not that we'd ever date. Gwen visibly shuddered. She was still in public, so she was glad when she looked around and saw no one was looking at her funny. After getting her smoothie, Gwen started to walk home. She wanted to get Ben off of her mind. To her, letting him consume her thoughts like this was letting him win. I don't need that jerk. Just as Gwen was trying to keep her mind clear of Ben, he was trying to keep his mind clear of her. Even as he spent the whole week with Julie, as he intended to do, thoughts of Gwen would occasionally creep into his mind, no matter what he was doing. Sometimes they would make him angry as he remembered the harsh things Gwen had said to him, and other times they would make him feel guilty as he remembered how he'd yelled at her. Julie started to take notice, too. Throughout the week, she would often catch Ben staring into space, looking a little down. But whenever she asked him what he was thinking about or if anything was the matter, he would snap out of it and say it was nothing. This happened again several times on Friday night when they were on a date. Then, as Ben was walking her home, she noticed him looking off to the side. He looked guilty, like he wanted to admit something, but couldn't. "Are you sure you're all right?" Julie asked. It took Ben a moment to realize she was talking to him. "Oh, yeah, totally fine," he said, turning to flash her a fake smile. Julie gave him a look that told him she wasn't buying it. "I'm serious," Ben insisted. "I had a ton of fun with you tonight." Julie could tell he meant that. In fact, he always seemed to be having a good time when they were together, and she never had any reason to doubt him when he said so. She figured whatever was bothering him must be a personal problem that he just couldn't get off his mind, but she wanted to help him with it. "Ben, please," she said. She stopped walking and grabbed his other hand to stop him, getting him to turn and face her. I know there's something wrong. I don't like seeing you like this. So, could you please talk to me about it? Maybe I can help. Ben stared into Julie's pleading eyes. He still couldn't believe a girl like her cared so much for him. He sighed. Look, it's not really a big deal or anything, but I kinda had a fight with Gwen, Ben admitted, trying to undersell its importance to him, more for his own sake than Julie's. With your cousin? Julie asked. I'm sorry. Was it bad? Kinda, yeah. What was it about? Julie asked, hoping she wasn't being nosy. Just something stupid, Ben said. For some reason, it felt uncomfortable for him to talk about it. Julie looked at him sympathetically. Well, families fight. It happens. But whatever it was about, I'm sure she won't stay mad at you forever. Ben chuckled. Yeah. Fighting's kinda what we do. Have you talked to her since the fight? Julie asked. No, Ben said. We haven't seen each other. Then you should talk to her, Julie suggested. Ben sighed. I guess tomorrow. I'll talk to her then, just to see if she's still mad. Are you still mad? Julie asked. Ben hesitated. A little. He wasn't even sure anymore. Well, one way or the other, talking to her about it will make it better, Julie said. You think so? Ben asked. Well, I mean, you could always screw up horribly and make everything worse, Julie said with a teasing smile. Ben laughed. But I don't think you'll mess it up, she said, more seriously this time. Thanks, Julie. That Saturday, Ben decided he wasn't even gonna think about it. He was just gonna take Julie's advice and go talk to Gwen. No planning, no preparation, no worrying. Just do it and see how it goes. When he left his house that afternoon, he slapped the Omnitrix, went XLR8, and took off. In seconds, he was at Gwen's house. Before he turned himself back into a human, he stared at his alien hands. This one really is my favorite. Super speed has gotta be the most convenient superpower ever. In a flash, he was Ben again. He walked right up to Gwen's door and knocked. I guess I could have just called. As he waited for Gwen to answer the door, he wondered if that would have been better or worse. No. Stop thinking. Just go with it. When Gwen opened the door, at first she seemed surprised to see him. Then she scowled. She didn't say anything, so for a moment they just stared at each other. Hey, Ben finally said, hoping he sounded casual. Hello, Ben, she said tersely. What, no insult? I'm insulted. Ben joked, smiling at her. Gwen didn't smile back. Yeah, this is going well. Did you need something? Gwen asked, as if she was busy and Ben was really starting to waste her time. Well, no. I mean, yeah. You wanna hang out? Ben asked. Gwen didn't respond for a moment. I can't, she said eventually. Oh, Ben said, disappointed. I have. Gwen continued. I have a date. Oh. Ben was surprised to hear that. Oh. Yeah, that's cool. Congrats. Gwen gave him an unamused look that said, don't patronize me. Well, maybe tomorrow then. Maybe, Gwen said. Goodbye. She closed the door. She didn't slam it in his face, she just gently closed it without waiting for Ben to say anything else. See ya, dweeb. Ben called through Gwen's front door, but got no response. He turned and walked away. Gwen on a date. Ben tried to picture it. The thought of it was strange to him for some reason. He wasn't quite sure how he felt about it either. Why the fuck did I say that? Gwen started pacing back and forth through her house after closing the door on Ben. She'd panicked. She still hadn't worked out how to handle her current situation with him. She didn't know what to do when he ambushed her at her front door like that. She wasn't willing to just pretend they hadn't been fighting like Ben was trying to do. She'd just wanted to get him to go away quickly so she could regroup with her thoughts and work this out. So she needed an excuse, and that had been the first thing that popped into her head for some reason. Well, at least I'm giving him a taste of his own medicine. Sort of. Gwen looked on the bright side. Maybe now he'd have some idea of how it felt to get blown off for a date. But what do I do now? Gwen thought about this lie of hers. Will I need to maintain it? Should I ever tell Ben the truth, or just let this be a one-time thing that we'll both eventually forget about? She considered keeping the lie going. Every now and then, she could cancel plans with Ben for one of her dates just to teach him a lesson. She could do it easily. He wouldn't ever have to know her boyfriend was made up. She'd still never even met Ben's girlfriend, after all. No. Gwen put a stop to this stupid idea of hers before it got out of hand, realizing the absurdity of it. Fake boyfriend. How pathetic can you get? At least that's how it would seem to Ben when he eventually learned the truth, she figured. She knew from the number of guys at school asking her out that she could get a date if she actually wanted to, but Ben didn't know that. It's fine. I won't bring this up again. And if he asks, I'll say the date didn't go well. End of story. Despite their unease, Ben and Gwen met up the next day. This time, Ben called Gwen instead of just showing up at her house. And since she was expecting it this time, she was much more prepared. Like yesterday, Ben acted as if they hadn't been ignoring each other for the past week. He simply asked her if she wanted to hang out. No apologies, then. Fine by me. Gwen was a little bitter about it, but this was nothing they hadn't done before. In fact, they'd gotten over many of their fights by just pretending they'd never happened. After all, they were both way too stubborn to apologize most of the time anyway. When the two of them met up, they decided to go to Mr. Smoothie and then wander around that area of town a little bit. As they spoke with one another, they tried not to show they were still a little uncomfortable. So, how have you been? Ben asked as they walked down the street sipping their smoothies. Gwen shrugged. All right, I guess. School's kinda picking up again. I like it, but it ends up being a lot of work. Ben nodded. Out of the corner of her eye, Gwen could see Ben constantly glancing at her. She turned her head to look at him, and he avoided eye contact. Will you just say whatever you wanna say, doofus? What about you? Gwen asked. What? Oh. Good. School's getting hard for me, too. Luckily I have Julie to help me. Gwen rolled her eyes, but said nothing. A little further down the street, Ben cleared his throat. I was just gonna ask. Ben kept his eyes forward as they walked, lifting his arm to scratch the back of his neck nervously. How was your date? Crud. Gwen was really hoping he wouldn't ask about it. But she had already prepared what she'd say if he did. However, before she could respond, she noticed something. Ben had already looked pretty uncomfortable before, but as soon as he asked her about her date, He looked exponentially more uncomfortable. "You're the one that brought it up, doofus. Last night, she'd decided she would say the date went poorly and then never bring it up again. But now, seeing Ben uncomfortable like this, she saw it as an opportunity. She gave Ben a smile that was part fake and part "I enjoy your suffering." "It was great," she said. She turned her head away and kept sipping her smoothie, but she kept a knowing smirk on her face that Ben surely noticed. "Oh," he said, again scratching the back of his neck. He looked more uncomfortable than ever. "Now you know how I feel when you won't shut up about your girlfriend." Gwen went home in high spirits that night. Hanging out with Ben had been fun. The initial discomfort hadn't lasted the whole day, and before she knew it, it was like their fight had never happened. However, as much as she'd enjoyed spending the day with Ben, she also felt kind of guilty. She'd blown him off for no real reason the day before, and she'd dropped a few more references to her made-up date throughout the day just to make Ben more uncomfortable. In her defense, she'd only mentioned it the first time because Ben had asked, and every time after that was in retaliation for him mentioning Julie. She'd been hoping he would catch on to how it made her feel since she was making him experience the same thing, but he hadn't seemed to notice. However, she couldn't deny that she was also just being petty. Ben had been getting on her nerves for a while now with the constant girlfriend talk, and she'd enjoyed having the chance to turn the tables on him for once. But she didn't want to hurt him. She realized he'd gone out of his way to spend time with her on the weekend, time he probably could have spent with Julie. It seemed like he was making an effort to apologize for their fight in his own way, and he was trying to show her that he wasn't going to ignore her just because he had Julie. He was making time for both of them in order to make everyone happy. "There's that damn hero complex." Gwen rolled her eyes, but she also smiled. Ben always had to be the hero, saving the day and helping everyone. She often said he was just full of himself, but if she had to be honest, she'd say it was one of the qualities she most admired about him. Gwen blushed a little, then frowned. Anyway, she tried to set her thoughts back on track. "Okay," she said out loud to herself, sitting in her room alone. Worried her parents would hear her talking to herself, she continued her monologue in her head. "Two choices. 1. Admit to Ben that I made up the whole date thing. And 2. Tell him I'm just not seeing that guy anymore." Gwen had already decided she had to put a stop to this fake boyfriend thing before it got out of hand. She knew it would only blow up in her face if she continued lying. Also, she felt bad about using the lie to make Ben uncomfortable on purpose, even though he did the same thing by accident. As she weighed her two options for dealing with the situation, she briefly considered getting out a pen and paper and actually making some kind of pros and cons chart about this. She laughed to herself. Just a few years ago, when she still lived her life by schedules and charts, she would have done that without hesitation. Wow, the old me really was a geek. Instead, she lay back on her bed, clutching the charm she wore around her neck, which she found helped her think. Something else came to mind as she thought about what to do. We never talked about it. Ben's strategy of pretending their fight hadn't happened had been surprisingly effective, but it didn't sit right with her. We promised. She came to two decisions. She was going to come clean to Ben about her fake date, and she was going to force him to talk about their fight. We need to do this the right way. Ben was nervous the next day when he got a text from Gwen saying she needed to talk to him. She texted him all the time suggesting they hang out or go do something, but she'd never said that before. He'd been planning to see if Julie wanted to hang out after school since they hadn't gotten a chance to see each other that weekend, but Gwen's text sounded serious enough that he couldn't just ignore it. He was pretty sure what she needed to talk to him about. They had just seen each other recently, but neither of them had brought up the fight they'd promised to talk about. However, the more optimistic side of him tried to come up with some other reasons she might have had. Maybe it's alien/magic stuff. Instinctively, Ben's right hand moved to grasp the Omnitrix. He let it go after a moment, moving instead to grasp the locket beneath his shirt. He took notice of both objects since they were at the front of his mind, but whenever he reached for them, he usually did it unconsciously. The Omnitrix was possibly his favorite thing in the world, and the locket also had tremendous sentimental value to him, even though he'd only gotten it last December. I really hope it's alien/magic stuff. It had been far too long since the last time he got to beat up aliens and bad guys. When he got to Gwen's house, he was prepared for some heroing. After ringing her doorbell, the door opened shortly after. "Sup, dweeb?" He casually greeted her when she appeared in the doorway. Gwen had been expecting him, so she wasn't surprised this time, but she forced a smile. "Hey, doofus. Come inside," she invited him. Ben followed her into her house, and she led him up to her room. He thought that was kind of odd, since her parents weren't home and they wouldn't need the privacy. "So, you wanted to talk to me about something?" Ben asked, deciding to get right to the point. "Yeah." Gwen nodded, shifting nervously on her feet. She took a deep breath. "I kinda have to tell you something." Ben looked at her expectantly. He was worried she might have some tragic news or something. "So, last Saturday, when you showed up here," Gwen continued, "I told you I couldn't hang out because I had a date." "That was a lie." Ben raised his eyebrows in mild surprise and confusion. "I just didn't want to hang out with you because I was still angry about the week before," Gwen admitted, looking Ben directly in the eyes as she spoke now. "Oh," Ben said. "You're still mad about that?" he asked, trying to play it off as though it wasn't a big deal. Gwen glared at him. Ben could tell the dismissive way he'd said that had really ticked her off. "Well, you never exactly apologized for it," she said, defending her right to be mad. "Neither did you," Ben shot back, meeting her gaze. Gwen opened her mouth to respond to that, but she stopped herself. She sighed and held up her hands in surrender, her expression softening as she did so. "Look, I'm not trying to start another fight with you. I just want to talk about it." "Why?" Ben asked. As far as he could tell, that wasn't necessary anymore, and it would just make them fight more. "Because we have to." "But why?" Ben insisted. "We got along just fine yesterday, didn't we? It's all water under the bridge at this point." "But it's not," Gwen said, a little more forcefully. "We haven't solved anything. If we don't do this now, you know as well as I do it'll just come up again later. Besides, we promised." "All right, fine." Ben threw his hands up defeatedly. "What do you want me to do, break up with Julie? Will that solve everything?" "No. That's not what this is about." "It sure seems like it is," Ben argued. "You hate it when I spend time with her. You can't even stand it when I mention her." Yeah, but Gwen stuttered a little, trying to come up with a response. It was obvious this wasn't going the way she'd expected. "Do you have any idea how annoying this is for me?" Ben continued. I finally find someone from my school I wanna hang out with, but I can't even do that without pissing you off. And if I spend time with you instead, she thinks I'm getting bored of her. I can't win. Ben. Ben. Gwen said frantically, stepping forward and putting her hands on his shoulders. Look, you're right. I'm sorry, okay. But just please calm down. Ben saw the look in her eyes. She genuinely felt sorry for him, and she was even a little scared of how angry he was. He hadn't even realized how loudly he'd been shouting at her. He breathed deeply for a few moments, letting Gwen's touch calm him down. Sorry, he said quietly. It's okay, Gwen said, taking her hands off of him and stepping back. You're right. I guess I haven't really thought about how hard this must be for you too. Why, yeah. Ben nodded gravely in agreement, hoping he hadn't been too hard on her. I know you've been trying to make time for me, and I appreciate it. Really. I get lonely without you, Gwen admitted, shyly avoiding eye contact. I know, Ben said. I wasn't trying to ditch you last week. I know. You were just trying to do something nice for your girlfriend, Gwen said. And that's fine, just be upfront about it. You can make plans with her, just don't cancel our plans to do it. Okay. That's all I want. Ben nodded. Okay. After a moment of silence, Gwen let out a relieved sigh. There, she said with a smile. That wasn't so hard, was it? I guess not, Ben reluctantly agreed. He was glad that was finally settled, but something else from earlier came to mind all of a sudden. So, you don't have a boyfriend, right? He asked, somewhat nervously. Gwen blushed a little. No, I don't. So what? She said, as if she were defending herself again. No, I was just wondering. Ben wasn't sure why he cared, or whether Gwen having a boyfriend would make things easier or even more complicated, but for whatever reason, he was glad to hear that. May, Year 3, Part 1. Ben was amazed when his school let the students out half an hour early. It wasn't that big of a deal since it was only about half a class period worth of time, but his school usually didn't do half days or anything, so getting let out even a little bit early was almost unheard of. He had plans to meet up with Gwen after school, but now he had a bit of time to kill until then. He would have loved to spend that time with Julie, but she had to run home to get her stuff for tennis practice. So, he decided to just head to the park to wait. On his way there, he felt his phone vibrate. Home. Gwen or Julie? Ben tried to guess who it was as he took his phone out of his pocket, but it turns out it was neither. The message was from Lucy. Lucy. He hadn't seen her in months, but he had talked with her online a few times since then. Hey triple exclamation point, he said, reading her message out loud. Sounds like her. Hey, what's up? He messaged back. Are you with Gwen? She asked. Not right now. Lame. Ben spent a moment trying to decide how he was supposed to respond to that, but before he could think of something, Lucy sent another message. Well, go get her and Skype me now. I got some big news. It's gonna be a bit, but we'll call when we get home, Ben sent back. Lucy responded with a bunch of smiley face emojis, so Ben figured she was satisfied with that answer. Big news. Ben wondered what it could be. Lucy sounded excited about it, so it was probably something good. Maybe Joel and Camille were doing more Baird's space hero stuff, Or maybe aliens were invading Earth again and humanity needed Ben to lead the fight against them. That last one made Ben smile as he let himself daydream a little. When he got to the park, he thought about texting Gwen and telling her to hurry up because Lucy wanted to talk to them. But instead, since he was so early, he decided he might as well head to her school and meet her as soon as she got out. I've been wondering what her school is like anyway. You heading out? Emily asked. Gwen had been packing her books into her bag when Emily rolled up to her desk. Yep, Gwen said, picking up her bag. What are you up to today? She asked as they left the classroom together. Piano practice, Emily answered. What about you? Doing some karate. Nope. Just hanging out with my cousin. The one you love or the one you hate? Gwen looked confused. I only have one cousin, she said. Well, there's Lucy, technically. Is Ben supposed to be the one I love or the one I hate? You tell me, Emily said with a smirk. What's that supposed to mean? Emily laughed. I'm just saying, you're kinda back and forth on that one. It seems like he's been on your good side lately, but you were complaining about him for, like, a solid month or so before that, she explained. Gwen blushed with humiliation. Okay, there's no way I talk about him that much, right? Well, he can be kind of a jerk sometimes, Gwen admitted. Emily chuckled, but she mercifully changed the subject. So, you are still doing karate though, right? What? Oh, yeah. In fact, I'll be getting my black belt pretty soon. Gwen smiled proudly. Wow, really? That's awesome, Gwen. Emily beamed. Well, I'll be testing for it, Gwen said, deciding to downplay it. So I hope I get it. When they reached the front entrance of the school, they continued talking since they'd still be going the same way for a bit before splitting up. You have a recital coming up? Gwen asked. Nothing major anytime soon, Emily said. But I still gotta keep practicing. Gwen was about to ask something else, but she was interrupted by a voice calling to her from the side. Gwen. Startled, Gwen turned to see Ben walking towards her. Her eyes opened wide in surprise. What's he doing here? Emily smirked. Another one of your hopeless suitors? She asked, mistaking Ben for a guy Gwen must have turned down at some point. But Gwen didn't answer her. She didn't even seem to hear her. Instead, she stared at her cousin with a dumbfounded look on her face as he strode up to them. When he was only a few paces away, she suddenly lunged at him. Emily looked on in shock for a split second since it looked like Gwen was about to beat the crap out of this guy. But she didn't attack him. Instead, she jumped into a hug. Ben caught her, wrapping his arms around her waist and holding her up while Emily watched in confusion. Whoa, 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 hey. Ben let go of Gwen and she dropped to her feet, but she didn't let go of him. Not in front of people, he said, sounding embarrassed. Gwen giggled at his reaction, then stepped back. The two of them had been on much better terms for the past month. They didn't usually hug like that, but seeing him come visit her at her school like this for the first time just made her uncontrollably happy all of a sudden. After remembering that Emily was still there, Gwen turned back to her and saw she had a big smile on her face. So you do have a boyfriend? Emily sounded surprised and happy. What? Ben and Gwen shouted at the same time, quickly taking a large step away from each other. No, 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 Gwen said. Gross. Ben said. Emily was more confused now. She looked back and forth between the two of them. They were both redder than the boy had been when Gwen hugged him. "Emily," Gwen said. "This is my cousin, Ben." Now it was Emily's turn to be embarrassed. "Oh," she said, making an apologetic face. Sorry, I thought, never mind." And Gwen gestured to the other girl. "This is Emily. She's been in my class for years." "Hey," Ben said, still feeling rather awkward. Emily quickly regained her composure. "So, I finally get to meet the famous cousin," she said. "Gwen's told me all about you." "I certainly hope not," Ben said, putting his left arm behind his back. He looked over at Gwen, who gave him a very subtle shake of her head to confirm that Emily didn't know. Emily laughed. "Don't worry, she's said some very nice things about you." "Oh really?" Ben asked, shooting Gwen a cocky smile. No." Gwen stuttered. "Usually when I tell Emily about you, I'm venting because you've been a total doofus or something." Emily laughed. She found it weird how quickly Gwen denied praising her cousin considering the enthusiastic greeting she'd just given him. She figured she was just embarrassed to be around her family, and she'd only hugged him because she'd slipped up and forgotten there was anyone else around. "What are you doing here, anyway?" Gwen asked, sounding more curious than accusatory. "Lucy wants us to Skype her," Ben said. "She texted me saying she has big news." "Oh." Gwen immediately began to wonder what the news could be, but she also knew it could be dangerous to talk about anything alien-related in front of other people. "We should go to my house then," she suggested. "Yeah, good idea," Ben agreed. "Emily, I'll see you tomorrow," Gwen said hurriedly, giving her a wave as they turned to leave. "See ya," Ben said as well. "Nice meeting you," Emily called to Ben as they left. At Gwen's house, Ben and Gwen went straight up to Gwen's room. "We haven't seen Lucy in forever," Ben remarked as Gwen opened up her laptop. "I know," she said. "I wonder what's going on with her." As she spoke, Gwen made a few clicks with her mouse and sent Lucy a video call. In a few seconds, the blonde alien appeared on screen. "Hello, my favorite name-rhyming cousins." Lucy greeted them immediately. "Hello," Gwen said. "Hey, Lucy," Ben said. Lucy was already grinning broadly at them. She seemed so happy to be talking to them both, and her happiness was infectious. "How have you been?" Gwen asked politely. "Oh, I've been great. And hey, look at you two. You look fantastic." Lucy responded, immediately taking the opportunity to compliment them both. "Hey, thanks," Gwen said, idly running her hand through her hair. "So, I hear you've got some news for us," Ben said, intrigued. "Yes," Lucy shouted, lunging her face at the camera, causing Ben and Gwen to flinch back from Gwen's laptop. "The news." She stood up and stepped back from the camera. "Lucy is moving to Bellwood," she announced in third person, striking a pose. "Wow, really? That's great, Lucy," Gwen said. Ben chuckled. "You know, that's probably the first time anyone's ever been excited about moving to this town." "Oh, come on," Gwen said. "Bellwood's not that boring. We get criminals and aliens to fight now and then. And now you're gonna have me there," Lucy said. "Sweet," Ben said. "I missed having someone around to help me mess with the dweeb." "Hey," Gwen complained while Lucy just giggled. "So, why are you moving?" Gwen asked out of curiosity. "And why are you moving here?" Ben chimed in. "Joel and Camille are quitting the plumbers," Lucy answered. Wait, what? Really? Why? Ben was surprised that they'd ever want to quit such a cool job. Lucy hesitated for a second, then shrugged. They just kinda wanna settle down and have a normal life, I guess, she said. She kept her smile up as she spoke, but Gwen thought it looked a little forced. So, they got jobs working with Ben's dad, she said, pointing at Ben. Huh? Really? My dad hasn't said anything about that yet, Ben said. I know, Lucy said. I told Joel to tell your dad to not tell you, because I wanted to tell you. She laughed gleefully. Oh, and by the way, Ben, your voice has gotten so much deeper. It has? Ben asked. He'd noticed his voice had changed slightly in the last year, but he didn't think it was very noticeable yet. Gwen laughed. Are you kidding? Of course it has. I can actually tell your voices apart now. Lucy laughed at that. Ben complained, his voice cracking as he spoke. My voice was never as high as Lucy's. It wasn't quite as high, but you two used to sound pretty much exactly alike, Gwen insisted with a teasing smile. But don't worry, Ben, Lucy said. Now your voice is deep and sexy. Ben opened his eyes wide in shock. You? Gwen scrunched up her face in disgust. Lucy laughed at their reactions. Well, anyway, Gwen said, trying to steer the conversation away from that. When do you move? She asked Lucy. Lucy looked up and to the side as she searched her memory. I forget the exact date, but we're set to move there in August. Which school are you gonna be going to? Ben asked. Gwen's. Oh, man. Ben seemed disappointed. Don't worry, Lucy said. That just means I can help you annoy Gwen at the one place she was safe from you. Gee, thanks, guys, Gwen said. Lucy looked at the two of them on her computer screen. Gwen was seated in her desk chair in front of the computer. Ben stood behind her, his hands on the back of her chair, leaning over her. They both seemed so comfortable being in each other's personal space, and they both looked really happy right now. So, Lucy said. You guys got any big news for me? She asked, as if she were expecting something. Gwen put her hand to her chin as she thought. Well, I'm testing for my black belt soon, she said. Oh. And this? She reached into her shirt and pulled out her necklace. I recreated the charm of telekinesis. Lucy tilted her head to the side. Oh yeah, one of those charms of something or other, right? You guys told me that story before. So you made a new one? Yep. Gwen nodded proudly. She's a full-blown witch now, Ben said. Awesome. Lucy said. What about you, Ben? Any new Omnitrix aliens or anything? No, Ben said. But, I have a girlfriend now. Oh. Of course. Lucy grimaced. Gwen rolled her eyes at Ben's blatant attempt at bragging, while Ben seemed confused by Lucy's reaction. I mean, of course. That girl you told me about at the Christmas party, right? Lucy said, her usual smile coming back. Yep, that's her, Ben confirmed. What about you? You got a boyfriend? Ben asked Lucy. Nah, there aren't any guys at my school as hot as you, Lucy said with a teasing smile. Ben immediately felt flustered and didn't know how to respond to that. Lucy also noticed Gwen looked about as nervous as Ben did. She laughed. When I get to Bellwood, I'm sure Gwen can show me to all hotties at her school, she said. Other than herself, that is. Lucy. Gwen objected. Lucy laughed again. She thought it was only fair to tease Gwen after teasing Ben. She also checked for Ben's reaction. He was looking off to the side awkwardly, avoiding looking at Gwen. Lucy smirked. Well, that's all, really. Just wanted to say hi and tell you I was moving to Bellwood, Lucy said. Good to see you guys again, and glad to hear everything's awesome over there. Good to see you again, too, Lucy, Gwen said. Totally, Ben agreed. Alrighty. Next time you see me, we'll be like neighbors. Bye. Lucy gave a big smile and an enthusiastic wave to the camera as she signed off. Bye. See ya. Ben and Gwen said their goodbyes as well, then Gwen ended the call and closed the window. She's as crazy as ever, Ben said, stepping up beside Gwen. Yeah, Gwen agreed, turning her head to look at him. They locked eyes as they each simultaneously remembered how Lucy had called the other hot. Quickly, they both averted their gaze to random parts of Gwen's room, blushing deeply. Real crazy. These definitions are all wrong, Julie said, looking over Ben's papers. Where did you come up with them? Internet, Ben said. Figures. Julie shook her head. This one sounds like it comes from Yahoo Answers, she said, holding up the paper and examining it with a bemused look on her face. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Ben said. Julie sighed, but she smiled lightly. Helping Ben study could be difficult, but at least it was entertaining. You should probably redo all of these. And use the textbook this time. I guess. Ben agreed, taking his papers back. Can you help me with them, though? Of course. Julie said. What would you do without me? Fail. Julie laughed. Just wait a couple years till we're in high school. I don't wanna think about that. Ben had enough trouble with his simple middle school classes. Every time he heard about high school, his only thought was it gets worse. It was almost time for him to go, so he collected his things and stuffed them into his backpack. I wanna ask you something, Julie said before he finished packing, looking a little excited. Sure, what's up? Ben asked, putting his bag down. I've got a very important tennis match coming up, Julie said. If I do well, I might qualify for the tournament I've been telling you about. You want me to come cheer you on? Ben offered. He'd come to watch her matches a few times before, and he wouldn't object to doing so again. Julie smiled. Yes, that would mean a lot to me, she said. Then consider it done, Ben declared. When is it? The Saturday after next, she said. I'll be practicing a lot more than usual between now and then. Ben had noticed she'd already been having practices more often lately. Don't worry about it, he said, knowing she was telling him they couldn't hang out as much while she was busy. Do whatever it takes to really crush the competition on game day. Julie looked proud. You know I will. Ben sipped his smoothie as he watched the TV screen. He was lying on his stomach on Gwen's bed, while Gwen sat on the edge playing a single-player game. Go around that way, Ben advised. Which way? Gwen asked. That way, Ben repeated. Really not helping, Gwen said, annoyed. The game was getting stressful. She was low on ammo and healing items, and she was trapped in a room with two hard-to-kill boss enemies. Shoot him, Ben said. I can't hurt him from the front, Gwen reminded him. Use a bigger gun, Ben suggested. Gwen rolled her eyes and switched to the shotgun. She ran up to one of the bosses and shot him in the chest. He just roared angrily and charged at her, large Wolverine-like claws extending from devices on his wrists. Ah! Gwen shrieked as her character was hit. Shit, she cursed under her breath, pausing to heal before running around the corner. Bigger gun. Real smart, Gwen quipped angrily. Ben shrugged, even though Gwen wasn't looking at him. Gwen decided to try a different approach. Switching to the sniper rifle, she waited for the enemy to be in the right position. Once his back was exposed, she took the shot. It hit, causing the enemy to flail about in pain, so she shot a couple more times. Some of her shots missed due to the boss's erratic movements, but the second and third successful hits brought him down. Yes! Gwen cheered. Just as she was about to brag to Ben, a set of claws impaled her character from behind. Ah! Gwen shrieked again. Her character fell to the ground as the words "You are dead" appeared on screen. Ben started laughing. Forgot about the second one, didn't ya? Gwen turned and gave him a dirty look, then thrust the controller towards him. Here, let's see you do better. All right, watch the master, Ben said, sitting up and moving to the edge of the bed to sit beside her. Taking the controller, he handed Gwen his smoothie. Hold this, he said. Gwen took his drink, but she wasn't happy about it. Ben restarted at Gwen's last checkpoint, which was just when she'd entered the boss room. There were a few normal enemies in the room along with the bosses to start with. He began to take out the weaker enemies first, one by one. Gwen watched the screen. She was hyper-focused on how he played, trying to find things to critique him on. She was good at this game, and she wasn't about to let him be better at it than she was. Would you quit burning through all my ammo? Gwen asked irritably after Ben unloaded several extra shots into a zombie as it died. You gotta double tap, or else they just get back up, Ben replied. I know that, doofus, but that one was already doing his death animation. Those last few shots were a complete waste, Gwen argued. Who cares? We got lots more, Ben said, switching to the machine gun. Gwen sighed and leaned back. She continued to watch as Ben dispatched all the weaker enemies, leaving just the bosses. Even though his method was very brute force oriented and wasted more ammo than necessary, she had to admit he was handling it pretty well. He'd killed all those zombies faster than she had, and he'd only gotten hit once or twice. Without thinking, Gwen took a sip from Ben's smoothie. That's not bad. She liked the taste, and she was wondering what flavor it was when she realized what she was doing. Immediately, she started retching and spitting. What are you? Ben paused and turned to see what Gwen was doing. He noticed how she was holding his smoothing away from her as she coughed. What, you don't like that flavor? The smoothie's fine. I just remembered it was yours, she said with disgust. Oh, what, you don't want my cooties? Ben asked. It had been years since they'd complained about each other's cooties, so Ben was taking the opportunity to act like she was being the immature one for once. More like your germs, doofus, Gwen retorted. We both know how unhygienic you are. When's the last time you brushed your teeth, huh? Hey, I do that at least twice a week now. Gah. Does he think that's a lot? Ben unpaused and went back to the game. Following the advice he'd given Gwen, he kept his shotgun ready as he moved to deal with the bosses. Rather than trying to snipe them like Gwen had, he went right up to one of them. As soon as it charged at him, he ran out of the way, and the monster got his claw stuck in the wall. Ben turned and shot him in the back at point blank. That didn't kill it, though. It flailed around, thrashing wildly and hitting Ben multiple times. "Heal!" Gwen shouted. "Nah, I got this," Ben said dismissively. As the boss calmed down and steadied himself, Ben pointed his shotgun at him and fired twice more. The boss fell to the ground dead. Ben snickered at his victory, both over the game and over Gwen. Next, Ben turned to the remaining enemy, and attempted to repeat the process. However, when this one charged, he couldn't get out of the way fast enough, and he got hit again. His health was in the red now. "Heal," Gwen said, more urgently this time. "All right, geez." Ben paused to use a healing item. Gwen wasn't sure why she was helping him, since she didn't want him to win. He would just end up thinking he was better than her if he did. So she decided to remain silent from now on, simply watching Ben play. While her focus was on Ben, she didn't realize it when she started sipping his smoothie again. And boom! Ben said as he lined up his kill shot. With one last shotgun blast, the second boss went down, and the gate blocking the exit lifted open. "There," he said, handing the controller back to Gwen. "That was me doing better." Gwen glared at him as she took the controller and gave him back his drink. "You only beat this room because you got to watch me try it first, so you knew what to do." Ben smiled smugly. "Oh, I'm sorry, all I hear is I lost and now I'm salty about it." "All right, fine," Gwen said. "If you're so good, how about you fight the final boss of this area when I get there?" Ben's eyes lit up when Gwen issued her challenge. "All right. I bet I beat it on the first try." "I'll take that bet," Gwen said, also getting into the competitive spirit. "And I bet I won't die at all on the way there." They didn't even bother setting terms for the bet. Even just a few seconds of bragging rights was enough of a reward for both of them. As she played, she heard slurping sounds from Ben sipping his smoothie beside her. She turned her head slightly to look at him. That was when she realized his lips were on the straw. The same straw that her lips were on moments ago. "Oh. Oh no. What's the hold up?" Ben asked, Gwen's character not having moved at all while she was looking at him. He noticed she appeared to be staring at his smoothie, blushing slightly. "What is it?" he asked, confused. Gwen snapped out of her daze and glared at him. With a quick movement of her hand, she grabbed the straw out of Ben's cup and tossed it across the room. "Hey, what the hell? Your slurping was annoying me," Gwen shouted. All right, geez, you always overreact to the most random things." Ben removed the lid from his smoothie and began sipping it without the straw. Gwen grunted in annoyance. "And you always underreact to everything." "I guess I win," Gwen said proudly as she walked Ben downstairs to her front door. "Like hell you do," Ben said. "You couldn't beat him either." Ben and Gwen had both tried and failed to beat the next boss. Since Ben had to leave, they had been forced to put the game on hold until the next time he came over. "The bet was never about whether or not I could beat him," Gwen pointed out. "Are you kidding me?" Ben gave her an amused look, to which Gwen smiled smugly. At the front door, Ben started putting his shoes on to leave. As Gwen stood there, her smug smile faded, and she started nervously fidgeting. "Hey, home. You're coming to my black belt test, right?" she asked, somewhat sheepishly. "Of course," Ben replied. "I wouldn't wanna miss you getting your official Badis card." Gwen's face lit up. "Great," she said. Ben suddenly had a sinking feeling. When is it, exactly?" Please don't say next Saturday. Next Saturday, Gwen said. Oh please no. Ah, by next Saturday, do you mean, like, in a couple days? This weekend? Ben asked, hoping that was the case. Gwen shook her head. Not this weekend. Next weekend, Gwen clarified. Goddamit. Ben couldn't believe his bad luck. Julie stuff overlapping with Gwen stuff was always a problem for him. So of freaking course when both of them have important stuff they want me to attend, they just have to be at the same time. Gwen's smile faded when she saw the look on Ben's face. You can come, right? She asked, hoping she didn't sound worried. Ben grimaced. Julie has this big championship qualifying tennis thing that day too. Gwen said nothing. She leaned her head forward, urging him to continue. Shit. What do I do? Ben froze. He knew he had to pick one, but that wasn't something he could do so easily, especially on the spot like this. Please, Gwen said, her voice uncharacteristically pleading. Ben scratched the back of his head, his eyes not meeting her eyes anymore. I really don't think I can make it. I already told Julie I'd be there to watch her. But you already told me you'd be there to watch me, like, months ago. Gwen argued. Granted, all the previous times they'd discussed Gwen getting her black belt, she'd had no idea when her test would actually be, but Ben had agreed to be there for it regardless. Hey, it's not like Ben stopped himself. He'd been ready to defend himself from what he thought would be a string of insults and accusations from Gwen. But the look on Gwen's face wasn't one of anger. She just looked sad, like he'd really let her down. Oh, that's just not fair. Making Gwen angry he could handle, he was used to that. Making her sad, though, just made him feel like the bad guy. Gwen, I'm sorry, but this is really important to Julie, Ben said. And you don't think this is important to me? Gwen asked. Besides, it's just a qualifying match for her, right? She'll have lots of other matches that are way more important. But this is my black belt test. I know that, it's just, I really think she needs me there for support, Ben said. It's gotta be really stressful for her. If I ditch her on game day. That's exactly why Gwen closed her eyes like she was fighting back tears. Look, she said, calming down a little. She reached into her shirt and pulled out her charm. You weren't there when I finished making this, she said, holding it up. That was a really important day for me. And my black belt test. It's gonna be an important day for me, too. And Gwen stared into Ben's eyes. He could tell she was working up the courage to say something she really needed to say. I want you there for these important parts of my life. Gwen was practically trembling as she admitted that. She seemed embarrassed to have said something so serious and personal. Gwen. Ben didn't know what to say. He still wanted to honor his promise to Julie, but he was finding it very hard to say no to Gwen when this so clearly meant a great deal to her. I'll think about it. It was obvious that Gwen was extremely unsatisfied with that answer, but she couldn't bring herself to talk at the moment. Ben decided it would be best if he left this uncomfortable situation now. I'll see you later, Gwen, he said, taking his backpack and heading out the front door. Gwen just nodded in response. Shutting the door behind him, Ben started walking home. What the hell am I gonna do? Why the hell did I say that? Gwen ran upstairs and shut the door to her room. Her parents weren't home yet, but they would be soon and she wanted to be alone. She regretted what she'd just said to Ben. I want you there for these important parts of my life. She didn't know where that had come from, she'd just said it. But it was too much. That was just too heavy, and she shouldn't have dropped it on Ben so suddenly. I scared him off. He thinks I'm a clingy, over-emotional drama queen. He's never gonna come to my black belt test now. She sat down in her chair and sunk into the seat. For a few minutes, she just stared at the wall. At first, she kept blaming herself. She figured she could have convinced him to come watch her on her big day if she'd just done something differently a moment ago. But then her thoughts turned to Ben and his girlfriend. Why does he always choose her? Gwen asked, speaking to nobody. Oh, who cares about my cousin and my best friend? I've got a girlfriend who's way more important, she said, speaking for Ben. Honestly, this girlfriend thing really went to his head. Gwen's despair had turned to bitterness. The eternal cycle that was her relationship with Ben was repeating once again. Things went bad, then just when they started to get good, they went bad again. Every fucking time. She sighed. She should have been used to this by now, but it was just as frustrating to her as it had always been. And what made it worse was Ben didn't even seem to notice the pattern this time. After years of this nonsense, he was just as dense as ever. Turning in her chair, Gwen's eyes fell upon the framed picture of her and Ben on her desk. She stared at it miserably, clutching the charm hanging from her neck. I just want you to care. Ben was more than happy to spend some time with Julie. Over the last week or so, she'd been training extra hard for her big tennis match practically every day, so Ben hadn't seen her too much. He was also hoping she would help take his mind off of Gwen. He still hadn't exactly given her a straight answer about whether or not he'd be going to her black belt test, even though he had basically made up his mind already. He had chosen Julie, and he was hoping the time he spent with her would make him feel like he'd made the right choice. How was practice? Ben asked, walking beside Julie through the park. Julie finished taking a few gulps from her water bottle. Rough, she said. It's so hot today. But I'm feeling pretty good about everything. That's good, Ben said. What have you been up to lately? Julie asked. Hanging out with your cousin. Ben really wished she hadn't asked that. Yeah, I guess so, Ben said, nervously fiddling with the Omnitrix. When Julie said nothing else, Ben glanced to the side at her. From the concerned look she was giving him, he figured she could tell something was up. He sighed. She invited me to come watch her take her black belt test, he said, deciding to explain. Oh, that's cool. Julie said. But I can't make it, since it's on the same day as your qualifying match, he continued. Oh. Julie said, lowering her head guiltily. Great, now I've made them both feel bad. I can't win. I'm sorry, Julie said. Ben was expecting her to say more. He was prepared for Julie to selflessly suggest that he go to his cousin's thing instead of hers. From the guilty look on her face, it was clear she at least wanted to say something like that. It was her nature. But she didn't say anything. Ben figured that meant she really wanted him to come watch her, and she was afraid it would make her selfish if she said so. Either she was nervous and wanted the support, or she just felt it was important for her boyfriend to be there when she finally made it to the championship. It's okay, Ben said. She's upset, but she'll get over it. Julie stopped walking and suddenly put on a serious look. She took his hands in hers and looked him in the eyes. I know it must be tough for you to be in situations like this, having to choose between me and your family," she said. "And I'm sorry I put you in them. But I want you to know, it means a lot to me that you chose me." Ben blushed. "It's no big deal, really. Of course I'd choose you," he insisted. Julie gave him a tender smile, then leaned in to kiss him. Ben was surprised. The kiss went on for much longer than it normally did. "Whoa." Julie stepped back and smiled at him again, taking his hand to resume walking. "Did I do this right?" Ben had mixed feelings about the entire situation. He had chosen Julie, and she seemed very happy about that. He thought that was what he wanted. And he did feel good about that. But he felt something else too. Some other feeling he couldn't shake. On Saturday, Gwen was out in her backyard wearing her karate gi, practicing her forms. Her black belt test was in just a few hours, and she wanted to make sure she knew every move by heart. She was nervous. Having started practicing karate when she was very young, she knew she was going to be the youngest student testing today. It would be just like when she'd gotten her red belt. All her instructors had been impressed with her, seeing how young she was. They seemed to have high expectations of her now, too. But sure, no pressure. As she moved through her forms, every now and then she'd hesitate. For just a second or two longer than she should be, she would stop in between moves to think about what she was supposed to do next. Every few times she did this, she would start the form over again from the beginning, trying to get it right. After the fourth time repeating her latest form, she stomped her foot in frustration. Gwen had high expectations of herself too, and she didn't like it when she couldn't meet them. After practicing for a while, she decided to head back into the house and up to her room. Immediately, she walked over to her desk and checked her phone. Nothing. Gwen groaned in anger, slamming her phone back down onto her desk. She hadn't seen Ben much in the past week. She'd tried asking him to come watch her black belt test again a few days ago, and then she'd tried yet again just yesterday. Both times, he'd refused. Gwen knew he was just as stubborn as she was, so she knew she should probably just accept that he wasn't coming. But she couldn't help herself. Last night and all morning, she'd kept checking her phone, hoping against hope that Ben had changed his mind. But he hadn't. She clenched her fists. Her body shook with pent-up anger. She had to restrain herself from kicking something, since she didn't want to injure herself before the test. Screw it. More practice would be better for her than worrying about Ben, she decided. So, she stormed out of her room and went back outside. Standing in her backyard, she got into her stance, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. I can do this. I don't need him. Author's note. Thanks again for the feedback. I guess I've got more questions that need answering. If the story is already written, why do we have to wait a whole week for one chapter? The short answer is you can get one decent chapter every week or 20 plus terrible chapters right now, choose wisely. The long answer is I originally started this story as writing practice and never intended to share it, so it's in dire need of editing if I want other people to be able to enjoy it at all. You don't see all the errors I've been fixing, and if you think my prose is bad now, imagine how it was before. Oh, I just want to give Gwen a hug. Same. Like all the time. Since this is pre-written, have you ever made any changes to the script you felt didn't fit right to the story we've seen so far? Yes, actually. The direction I ended up going in at the end was a little different than what I'd originally planned, so some of what the characters said and did earlier on had to be altered slightly to fit better. I also added and extended a lot of scenes in year 1 since it was pretty bare bones to start with. Is there any distinct possibility of you engaging in writing a sequel, or if you are in the progress of writing one right now to this story set in the Alien Force time period? Either that, or I'd also be interested to see a Banks Lucy fanfic too, since the character stood out to you as much as it did to me. May, Year 3, Part 2. Nothing felt right to Ben as he walked to the tennis courts where Julie's qualifying match was set to take place. He continued to tell himself that he'd made the right decision. This was what Julie wanted, and this was what he wanted. But he couldn't get his mind off of Gwen. She probably hates me now. He'd felt terrible turning her down again and again when she kept asking him to change his mind, but he knew there was no way he could please both of them. He was going to let down either Gwen or Julie no matter what he did, so the best he could do was make one of them happy at the moment. It's not like they can't do it without me there anyway. Julie didn't really need him sitting in the audience while she played in order to win, and Gwen didn't need him there in order to earn her black belt either, as far as Ben could tell. All he was really doing was providing a little moral support. However, even after thinking this through, his decision still felt like it carried a lot of weight for some reason. Why can't I be in 2 places at once? Suddenly, he had an idea. Wait. Can't I? Ben stopped walking to flip through his aliens until he came to the one he was looking for. Ditto could allow him to split himself up. One could go watch Gwen, and the other could go watch Julie. This seemed like the perfect solution to his problem, but then he remembered how Ditto worked. No good. I can't change back into me unless all the Dittos are in one place. And I can't talk to Julie after the game as a Ditto. Damn it, he swore under his breath. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. All out of last-minute ideas, he continued walking. As he got closer to the courts, he checked the time. He still had a few minutes before Julie would be playing, and by now, Gwen's black belt test was already well underway. Guess it's too late to change my mind now anyway. The courts Julie would be playing at were in a small open-air stadium. When Ben arrived at the entrance, he stopped just before he got to the doors. Images flashed through his head. He imagined Julie winning her tennis match, then smiling up at him in the bleachers. He came down to the court to congratulate her, and they kissed. They both seemed so happy. Then he imagined Gwen. He pictured her in her karate gi, breaking boards and moving through her forms. She and the others lined up at the end of the ceremony as their instructors congratulated them and presented them with their brand new black belts. He saw Gwen looking at her parents in the cheering audience. She smiled at them, but her eyes couldn't hide her disappointment as she looked at the empty chair beside them. Ben shook his head, snapping out of his daze. He was breathing heavily now, having a mini panic attack as the guilt set in. He suddenly had the strong feeling that he was in the wrong place. He put his hands on his head and tried to calm himself down, but he couldn't. I have to go back. He'd made the wrong choice. This was too important to Gwen. He needed to be there for her, if for no other reason than because she wanted him there. Ben checked the time. He was already very late, and he was on the wrong side of town. Luckily, I'm never far from anything. Ben lifted his arm and turned the dial on the Omnitrix, selecting XLR8. He looked around to make sure nobody else was hanging around outside the stadium, then lifted his other hand to activate the watch. I'm sorry, Julie. In a flash, he was gone. Gwen was upset. She'd kept checking her phone for a message from Ben right up until the last second, but she'd given up hope when it came time for her black belt test to start and she still hadn't heard anything from him. In order to focus, she tried to shut Ben out of her mind. She thought back to her training and ignored everything else as she went through her forms and demonstrated a number of techniques. For the most part, she was completely on point and did everything almost perfectly. Every so often, she would glance over at her parents. The first few times she did so, she gave them a grateful smile. But she wasn't really looking at them. She was looking to see if Ben had magically appeared in the seat beside them. Seeing that empty chair made her bitter. She was glad she had an excuse to look so focused and unhappy. Her parents would just assume it was from the stress of the performance. That's how things went for about half the duration of the test. Gwen and the other students went through various trials and demonstrated everything they'd learned up until that point. Gwen was by far the youngest student there, but she made sure to do her best at everything so she could earn her black belt like the rest of them. Even though others seemed impressed with her, she still wasn't happy. But something was different when she glanced over at the empty seat for what must have been the 20th time. This time, Ben had magically appeared. Gwen was so stunned, she wasn't sure if she was just seeing things. She locked eyes with him, and he noticed the eye contact. He gave her a very nervous smile and 2 thumbs up, encouraging her to do her best. Next to him, Gwen's mother smiled at her and placed a hand on Ben's shoulder, which caused Ben to freeze up in terror. But Gwen wasn't focused on her parents. "He's here." She gave a real smile for the first time that day, blinking back at her. Luckily, she and the other students had been lined up to listen to an instructor speak, so she hadn't screwed up anything by staring at Ben for so long. For the remainder of the test, Gwen enjoyed herself. She wasn't nervous at all anymore, she remembered how to do everything flawlessly, and she got to shoot Ben a smug grin every time she broke a board or pulled off a difficult move. Before she knew it, the test was over. She and the others lined up to listen to their masters give them a final speech before ceremoniously handing out their new belts. At the end of the ceremony, the observers clapped and cheered as she and the other new black belts bowed. The instant they were dismissed, Gwen practically sprinted over to Ben. She wanted so badly to hug him right then, but she stopped in her tracks at the last second. He was standing with her parents, and it would have been way too embarrassing to do something like that in front of them. "Congratulations, Gwen," her father said, giving her a hug. Gwen made eye contact with Ben while looking over her father's shoulder. They shared a look that they were familiar with, and the meaning was clear. "We'll talk later." "I'm very proud of you," dear Gwen's mother told her. "Yes, you really were quite extraordinary out there," her father said. "Thanks, Dad." "Thanks, Mom," Gwen said to her parents. Afterwards, her eyes turned back to Ben. "Nice work, dweeb," he said. "HMPH. Nice of you to show up, doofus." "But, thank you." Gwen's father put his hand on Ben's shoulder. "We're glad you could make it, Ben," he said before turning to Gwen. "Honey, why don't you go get changed, then we'll go out to dinner to celebrate," he suggested. Gwen smiled and nodded. She gave Ben one last incredulous look before she headed off to the locker room to change. "I can't believe he came." Dinner was awkward for Ben. As everybody else talked, Gwen was showered with praise for her accomplishment. She tried to remain modest about it, but she couldn't hide her pride. grinning from ear to ear as she explained how close she'd come to screwing up several times throughout the test, occasionally sharing funny stories about the other students she'd tested with. However, Ben didn't talk much at all. He was afraid of calling attention to himself, especially from Gwen. Whenever he and her made eye contact, she gave him that same "we'll talk later" look, and Ben was having a hard time figuring out if that was good or not. Was she happy to see me? Is she still angry? Ben honestly couldn't tell. At the black belt test, when she'd first spotted him, she'd looked pretty happy to see him. But maybe she was remembering how pissed off she was at him now that the surprise had worn off. Maybe she was planning to chew him out the second they got a moment alone away from her parents. And things got worse for Ben when he got a text message. Taking out his phone, he saw it was from Julie. "Oh. Where are you?" the message read. He stared at his phone. When he'd made the decision to abandon Julie's match to come watch Gwen's test, there were a lot of things he hadn't thought through, including how he would deal with this inevitable awkward situation. Already feeling horrible, Ben typed his response. "Sorry, something came up. Can we talk tomorrow?" "Okay. Is everything all right?" Julie texted back. Goddamn. That made him feel even worse. She was probably assuming some sort of emergency had kept him from her game, and now she would be worried about him. "I'm okay," Ben responded, although he didn't feel okay. "All right. See you tomorrow," Julie messaged back. "I am so not looking forward to that." He had no idea how he was going to deal with Julie, but right now, he needed to focus on how he was going to deal with Gwen. He'd shown up in the end, but he was very late, and she'd been upset about his initial refusal to come for over a week. He doubted she'd be willing to just let that go. As the Tennysons finished their dinner and left the restaurant, they decided to head back to Gwen's place. Ben and Gwen gave each other another significant look. After just a short car ride, they'd get a chance to talk in private. "Here we go." When they arrived at Gwen's house, Ben followed Gwen and her parents inside. Almost immediately, Gwen headed upstairs to her room, carrying her bag of karate gear. Ben wasn't sure whether or not she was just going to put her stuff away for now, but he decided to follow her. He was only a little worried about her parents. He and Gwen often went off by themselves, but maybe her parents thought it was weird of them to be in her room alone together. Nah. Why would they care? Entering Gwen's room, Ben found her already unpacking her things from the black belt test and putting them carefully away. When she saw him come in, she stopped what she was doing and turned to face him. Her eyes flickered to the door for a moment, and Ben got the impression that she wanted him to close it. "Now, I know I was late," Ben said, complying with her silent request. "And I know I kept saying no when you were asking me to come, and you're probably still." He was cut off by Gwen throwing her arms around him. She pressed her face into his shoulder and pulled him tight. Ben was surprised, so it took him a second to return the hug, but he did. They stayed like that for longer than Ben was used to. Even though they'd been doing it a bit more recently, hugging was still a pretty rare occurrence between them, and it was usually very brief since they both ended up embarrassed rather quickly. But not this time. Gwen didn't pull back, and Ben was willing to let her stay there. Gwen eventually lifted her head up, looking at Ben with tears in her eyes. "You were there. You were there when I really wanted you to be," she said, smiling gratefully. Whoa. Ben could tell this meant a lot to Gwen. He didn't know how to react to something with that much gravity, so he decided to try humor. Well, of course. A hero's always there when you need him, he declared triumphantly. Gwen laughed, taking a step back and half-heartedly shoving him. Well done, Mr. Hero, she said, quickly wiping a tear from her eye. But like all heroes, you could stand to get there a little earlier next time. Where's the drama in that? Ben asked with a cocky smile. Gwen smiled and shook her head. So what happened, anyway? She asked. Julie's match finish up quicker than you expected. Ben really wished she hadn't asked that. No. Gwen looked confused for a moment, then she put it together. What, you mean you just? Yep, Ben confirmed her suspicions. I kinda changed my mind at the last second. I was already at the stadium, too, and I had to go XLR8 to get to the other side of town. Wow. Gwen seemed to be at a loss for words. Ben was having trouble figuring out if she was trying to find the right way to express her gratitude or the right way to tell him he was an idiot. So, what are you gonna tell her? She asked after a moment. I guess she feels bad for Julie now. Ben grimaced. I haven't gotten that far yet, he admitted. I'm kinda making this up as I go. Well, Gwen said. Thank you for coming to support me today, and I'm sorry I forced you to choose me over her. Ben shrugged. I've fought aliens across space and time for you. I can deal with an angry girlfriend. Gwen smiled. He noticed her hand move to grip the charm on her necklace, which she was wearing above her shirt for some reason. Gwen seemed to notice him looking at it. She had a shy look on her face as she loosened her grip and let go of it. I just hope she's not too upset, Ben said, getting back to the subject. Gwen nervously toyed with her hair. Ben hoped she didn't think he was trying to guilt her, but she seemed to regain her resolve as she took a deep breath. I know this wasn't an easy decision for you, and I know it will probably have consequences. But, for what it's worth, I'm really grateful that you chose to do what you did. Ben nodded. You're welcome. I just hope I made the right choice. Hanging out with Gwen the night before had allowed him to briefly take his mind off of his plans to talk with Julie, but now the next day had come, and it was time to face her. As usual, he didn't have much of a plan. He was just going to apologize and hope she took it well. When Ben arrived at Julie's house, he rang the doorbell and waited until she opened the door. Hey, she greeted him. Hey, Ben said, already grimacing. Come on in, she invited, opening the door wider and stepping aside. Ben hesitantly stepped past her. He began to get nervous as Julie led him to her dining room table. So, how'd the match go? Ben asked her as he took a seat. Julie smiled proudly. I won. And I qualified. Hey, that's great. Ben congratulated her. A short, awkward silence followed before Julie asked what was on her mind. So, what happened yesterday? You said something came up. Ben's heart sank. He tried to assemble the words he was going to use. Well, I remember how I said my cousin was taking her black belt test. The disappointed look on Julie's face told him she'd already figured out the rest, but she nodded her head anyway. Yeah, she said, allowing him to finish. Well, she kept asking me to come watch her. Like, every day. And it really seemed like it meant a lot to her. So, I couldn't just abandon her. Ben tried to explain. Julie studied him for a moment. You couldn't abandon her? She asked, as if for clarity. Ben realized what she meant. It's not like I wanted to abandon you, though. I really wanted to come watch you play, too. I couldn't be in two places at once. Not without revealing my aliens to you. But you told me you'd already decided to come watch me, Julie pointed out. You never told me you'd changed your mind. Julie didn't seem angry, or at least she was doing a very good job of hiding it. Mostly, she just seemed hurt, but was trying to remain calm. I know, and I'm really sorry I didn't tell you, but it was a super last-minute decision, Ben said. That's not. Julie started talking a bit too loudly, but cut herself off. She took a moment to compose herself. It's not right to go back on your word like that, especially without saying anything, last minute or otherwise. I know. I'm sorry, Ben apologized again. Another awkward silence followed. Julie pressed her fingers to her temple like she was thinking long and hard about the situation. Are you mad? Ben asked, worried by the long pause. No, I'm not mad exactly, Julie said. Ben wasn't very relieved by the way she'd said that. It's just, I need to think about this. Okay, Ben said, nodding his head, looking guilty. Can you leave for now? I'm sorry to kick you out like this, but can we just continue this tomorrow? Like, after school? Julie requested. Sure, Ben agreed. This is bad. She'd never kicked him out of her house like this before. He tried to think of something else to say that could change her mind as she led him back to the front door, but he couldn't. Julie held the door open for him, and he walked outside. So, see you tomorrow, then. Ben awkwardly waved goodbye. Yeah, Julie said. See you tomorrow. She shut the door. Ben stood there for a moment. That didn't go well. He'd been expecting her to be angry, but this was somehow even worse. He had hurt her, so much so that she didn't even want to see him right now. He was looking forward to tomorrow even less than he'd looked forward to today. Monday was agonizing for Ben. He didn't try talking to Julie at all. She'd told him they'd talk again after school, and he wasn't gonna risk making his situation worse by trying to talk to her before then. He decided he needed to give her some space. She didn't try to talk to him either. In fact, she seemed to be trying not to even glance in his direction. In every class they shared that day, Julie faced the front of the room whenever possible, and if she had to turn in Ben's direction, she'd look at the floor while she did. Julie's friends seemed confused too, especially when Ben didn't sit with them at lunch. Ben tried to subtly look over at them a few times, but he was too far away to hear anything, and he was worried they were talking about him. Many times throughout the day, Ben found himself fiddling with the Omnitrix or grabbing the necklace Gwen had given him. Even though doing things like that were comforting, he stopped himself whenever he noticed he was doing it. He didn't want Julie or her friends to be able to tell how freaked out he was. As the end of the day approached, Ben was exhausted. He had been worrying about Julie all day, and he hadn't slept well the night before. By the time his final class of the day let out, Ben still hadn't heard from Julie. He was prepared to head home, half expecting Julie to have changed her mind about talking again that day. But after taking a few steps outside of school, he got a text from her. Meet me at the tennis courts. I need to talk to you. Ben was half relieved and half terrified. That didn't sound good, but at least he wasn't getting the silent treatment forever. On my way, he texted back. When he arrived at the tennis courts, the same place he had first asked Julie out, he found her sitting on a bench outside the fence surrounding the courts. She stood up and waited for him as he approached. Hi, she greeted him. She had a slightly pained expression on her face. Whatever she was about to tell him, neither of them were gonna like it. "Hi," Ben said, bracing himself. Julie cleared her throat. "Let me ask you something," she began. Ben waited for the question until he realized Julie wanted his confirmation. Sure. Go ahead. Why did you choose to go to your cousin's black belt test instead of coming to my tennis match?" she asked. "What?" Ben asked reflexively. He wasn't expecting a question like that. "I should have asked you yesterday, but why did you do it?" she asked again. "Well, she kept asking me to. It seemed like it meant a lot to her, and..." "You already told me that part," Julie said. "What I mean is, this also meant a lot to me. So why did you choose what was important to her over what was important to me?" I don't know, Ben was flustered. His last-minute decision to go to Gwen's event instead of Julie's hadn't exactly been well thought out, so he didn't have the answers Julie was looking for right away. "She's my cousin." That was the answer he gave. Julie looked at him for a moment, then she nodded. "Ben," she said, suddenly looking very apologetic. "I think we should break up." What? Ben was actually surprised. He'd expected her to be mad, but not that mad. In fact, she didn't even seem mad exactly, so her breaking up with him seemed a tad extreme. "Hold on a second. I mean, I'm really sorry, but this was just one mistake. I'll make it up to you, I swear." Julie held up her hand, and Ben stopped talking. "Listen to me," she said, still seeming surprisingly apologetic. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened. You've chosen her over me several times since we started dating. And I've chosen you over her plenty of times, too," Ben argued. "I know," Julie acknowledged. "But, when it came down to something truly important, you chose her. And I think you'll always choose her when it matters." "That's not true," Ben denied. "Ben, that's not a bad thing." Julie spoke as if he wasn't seeing the obvious upside of the situation. "I've told you many times that I admire how much you care about your family. It's just..." Julie looked away guiltily and paused for a moment. She took a deep breath. "I know this is gonna sound incredibly selfish, but I don't think I can be with you if I'm always going to be second to your cousin." "But you're not," Ben insisted. "I promise. You'll never have to be second to her again. I'll make sure you always come first, Ben, I don't want that." Julie interrupted him. "That wouldn't be any better. I'd hate to make you change that much just for me, especially if it ended up coming between you two." "What?" Ben tried to think of something else to say, but he couldn't. This all seemed so unfair to him. He'd done his best to keep his friendship with Gwen throughout his relationship with Julie, but it had all been for nothing. "I'm sorry," Julie apologized, as if she were the one responsible for everything. "We can still be friends, though. I still like you. There's no reason we need to stop hanging out altogether," Julie said, trying to cheer him up. Ben just nodded pitifully. Julie stepped towards him. Ben lifted his head up and locked eyes with her as she got close. Once she was directly in front of him, she leaned in and delicately planted a kiss on his cheek. "I'm sorry," she apologized again. "Goodbye, Ben." Ben didn't move from his spot as Julie walked away. He felt horrible. It was a million times worse than when he'd parted ways with Kai. What did I do wrong? On his walk home, Ben was in a daze. In his mind, he kept replaying the events that had just transpired. He'd never been broken up with before, since he'd never had an actual relationship with Kai. He didn't know what to do, and he just wanted to go home and be alone for a while. But as he was passing through the park, he heard a voice call out to him. Ben! Ben! Hey doofus, over here! Once he finally realized someone was trying to get his attention, he recognized the voice immediately. Gwen. He wasn't sure how he felt about running into her at the moment. Part of him was relieved, but part of him was reminded of the role she'd played in the events that led to his breakup, even if it wasn't really her fault. Nevertheless, he stopped walking and turned to face his cousin. Gwen walked right up to him. Hey, she greeted him. It was probably harder to tell from farther away, but now that they were up close, Ben looked very clearly distraught. Whoa, what's wrong? She asked, taken aback, but concerned. Ben stared at her silently for a moment. Julie broke up with me, he said. He hadn't realized he'd been holding back tears until he started speaking, but he continued to choke them back. Gwen opened her eyes wide in shock. Oh. She seemed to realize that the events of last weekend were the cause. Ben, I'm so sorry, I didn't think. Ben didn't say anything at first. He could have said it was all her fault. She'd continuously guilted him into changing his mind on Saturday. He could have called her a selfish jerk who ruined his relationship. But he didn't say any of that. Part of him wanted to, but he didn't feel like yelling at her. He didn't even really believe any of it was her fault. I just wanna be left alone. Whatever Ben said, turning away from her and continuing to walk home. Ben, wait. Do you wanna? No. Ben shouted, shooting her a dirty look that quickly turned into a pitiful one. I don't feel like talking right now. Gwen stood in silence as she watched him leave. When Ben got home, he went up to his room and sulked on his bed. He didn't do anything for the rest of the day. Even when his mother came to his room to tell him dinner was ready, he just said he wasn't hungry. His mother could tell he was upset and she tried to talk to him about it, but it was no use. He didn't sleep well that night either. The next day of school was a lot like the previous day, except it was a whole lot worse. Ben and Julie avoided each other completely. Back when he'd been unsure about whether or not Julie was upset with him, he could at least pretend everything was fine and it would go back to normal sooner or later. But now he was just depressed. He knew he'd screwed up his chances with Julie, and there was nothing he could do about it. At the end of the day, Gwen texted him, asking if he wanted to hang out. He just told her he wasn't in the mood and went home. Wednesday started the same way as well. Once school let out, Ben went straight home and collapsed onto his bed again. It looked like he was in for another night of doing nothing and feeling bad for himself. Then he heard the doorbell ring. He didn't think anything of it at first, but whoever was at the door just kept ringing it and wouldn't go away. Ben covered his ears with his pillow and groaned. The doorbell stopped ringing, and Ben felt a little relief. Then his phone started vibrating. Oh, come on. Whoever was at the front door really wanted to get into his house. But Ben didn't want to interact with anyone. He reached into his pocket and silenced his phone. It only took a few seconds to start buzzing again. Goddamit, Ben swore as he rolled over and sat up on the bed. He took his phone out and saw the caller ID. It was Gwen. He groaned as he put his phone on silent before lying back down. For a minute or two, everything was quiet again. Then he heard glass break. Ben bolted upright as a tiny rock came hurtling through his bedroom window, leaving a small hole in it. "What the hell?" Ben shouted, standing up and running over to the window. He opened it so he could look outside. Gwen was standing on his lawn, foot tapping impatiently. It looked like she was holding something, but Ben couldn't tell what it was. "Gwen, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted down to her. Gwen shrugged. "I owed you for those times you broke my bedroom window anyway. Now are you gonna come down and let me in or what?" Gwen called up to him. Ben hung his head and sighed. "Gwen, I really don't wanna." No, Gwen cut him off, waving her hand dismissively. "I don't wanna hear your moping. Just come downstairs and open the damn door." Ben glared at her, and she met his gaze. He wasn't sure what she was up to, but he felt like she was challenging him. Without another word, he turned around, left his room, and marched downstairs to open his front door. Gwen was standing there, and she was holding a container of brownies. Ben was confused, and said nothing as she stepped past him into the house, letting the door shut behind her. Standing in Ben's foyer, Gwen held the container of brownies out towards Ben. He looked down at them, then up at her face, and gave her a questioning look. "They're brownies," Gwen said. "I can see that," Ben remarked. "And I'm giving them to you," Gwen said, thrusting the container into his chest. She let go, and he caught it in his arms. "Why?" Ben asked. "What do you mean, why?" "I'm cheering you up, doofus," Gwen shouted, looking at him like he'd asked a stupid question. "Well, you're doing a hell of a job of it," Ben shouted back. The two of them glared at each other for a moment, but before long, Ben started to laugh. Lightly at first, but it slowly dawned on him how ridiculous the situation was, with Gwen so aggressively trying to cheer him up. Gwen joined in as she realized it too, and the two of them just laughed for a minute. "Try one," Gwen suggested after they'd calmed down. Ben opened the container and took a bite of one of the brownies. "These are good," Ben said. "Where'd you get these?" "I made them," Gwen said. "And don't worry, I haven't been taking cooking lessons from Grandpa." Ben smiled as he finished his brownie and picked up a second one. "Give me one of those," Gwen said, reaching for the container. Ben pulled it away from her. "I don't think so. I'm the one who needs cheering up here, remember?" he said, giving her a teasing smile. "Yeah, well, I'm gonna need some cheering up for having to put up with you," Gwen said, quickly snatching the container away from Ben. She picked one up and took a bite out of it. "I need some milk." Gwen walked out of Ben's foyer and headed to his kitchen. Ben shrugged, following her. Putting the brownies down on the table, she went over to a cupboard and pulled out 2 glasses, setting them down next to the brownies. Then she grabbed a carton of milk from the fridge and poured it into both glasses. Ben watched her, realizing how strange this was. The Gwen from a few years ago would never have been this comfortable in his house, but here she was walking around like it was her own. The two of them sat at the kitchen table to eat some more. For the next 20 minutes or so, they enjoyed their old pastime of joking about all the horrible food they'd eaten while spending the summer with their grandfather. Once they'd had their fill, Ben put the lid back on the container. "Thanks, dweeb," Ben said. It was embarrassing to thank her so genuinely, so he hoped they wouldn't have to make a big deal out of it. Gwen smiled. "No big," she said. They sat in silence for a moment. "Do you wanna talk about it?" Gwen asked, cautiously. Despite her earlier abrasiveness, she was being quite gentle now. Ben knew what she meant, even though she hadn't specified. He stared into space for a moment before responding. "I got crushed," he said, paraphrasing something she'd said to him after they met Kai. "Julie's great. She's smart and funny, and she liked me for me, without knowing about this." He held up his arm and tapped the Omnitrix. "But I screwed up." "Did it have anything to do with Saturday?" she asked. Ben turned to look at her again. He shook his head. "No." "Well, yes. I mean, kinda." Ben couldn't decide on how much detail he wanted to give Gwen about Julie's reasoning. "It's sort of like, that wasn't exactly the first time I'd done something like that, I guess." "Oh," Gwen said. She seemed a bit relieved to hear she wasn't completely responsible for their breakup, but she still looked at him with pity. "Don't worry. There's lots of other girls out there," she reminded him. Ben stared out the window. "You think I'll find another one like Julie? One that likes me for me?" he asked. Probably not. You are kind of a doofus. And when's the last time you took a shower? Frankly, I'm surprised Julie put up with you for this long," Gwen said, teasingly. Ben looked at her and laughed. "You know, you're really bad at this cheering up thing, dweeb." "You're really not worth the effort," Gwen replied, turning her nose up at him and smiling smugly. Ben chuckled again. "Well, on the bright side, at least I won't be missing her on our trip this summer," he said. "Oh yeah," Gwen said. Their next summer trip with their grandfather was less than a month away at this point. "We're gonna make this the best summer yet," she promised him. "We'll tell Grandpa to take us straight to the bad guys, 'cause we are way overdue for some crime fighting." "Yeah," Ben agreed, smiling. He held up his arm and flipped through the aliens in the Omnitrix. "That's just what I need." Author's note. Well, there you have it. Ben and Julie broke up. I'm sorry to the Julie fan who was disappointed by this. And to everyone else, I hope I was able to make this somewhat satisfying. Now for your reviews. You're a little lucky you basically have the story written out already. You just have to look over a chapter and fix any mistakes or anything you didn't like. I have a story, but author's block. That's exactly why I decided to finish the entire story before I started posting anything. If I hadn't, you guys would be getting one chapter a month if you're lucky, and I don't like leaving you hanging. Plus I have the benefit of hindsight, so I can change anything that no longer fits with the ending along the way. You snuck in a Migos line. I don't know what that means. Is Ben x Gwen x Lucy the end pairing? Why would I just tell you the ending? Seeing as you have answered the sequel question, I gotta ask, do you plan on writing anything else at all? Well, I don't want to get anybody's hopes up, because anything else I write would not be posted until a long time from now. We just passed the halfway point of this story, so I'd say there's maybe 4 more months until it's done. After that, I'll probably do what I did with this story and write the entire first draft before I start posting any of my next one, and that could take a year or 2 depending on how long it ends up being. I do have a few story ideas I've been tossing around though. One is a DC Universe story with characters from Young Justice and Teen Titans training at the Hive Academy, and it would basically be like a villainous version of My Hero Academia. Another idea I have is for a Legend of Zelda story that would be inspired by other fantasy series like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. So whatever I do next, it will be completely different and you likely won't get to see much of it for a long time. I'd like to have seen what precipitated Joel and Camille's decision, because it probably could have been fuel for an interesting subplot, but I suspect we won't get to. Otherwise it sort of comes across as a device of narrative convenience, which is not all that optimal. Oh, you mean like how you didn't get to see why Joel and Camille had to leave Lucy with Gwen the last time she showed up? Be patient. You're not gonna get all the information right away. I was getting more than hints of little moments early in the chapter. I don't really blame you, that was one of my favorite scenes too. Thoroughly underrated chapter with Michelle and all that. Yes. That was one of my favorite scenes in Little Moments. Definitely a direct inspiration for that part of my chapter. Update PS, just tryna annoy you like Lucy would. If it takes 1 week to write a solid chapter, then I can respect and wait for that. Thank you, stranger. I'm certainly glad you're liking my story enough to be this eager for updates. Hold the phone, did you just confirm a possibility of a Banks-Lucy relationship in year 4? She seemed to be rooting for Ben and Gwen to get together, but then again she does admire Ben for who he is and they do have some romantic moments. It's just confusing to determine what she's serious about and what she's not due to her goofy personality. You're not any more certain than Ben and Gwen are about what Lucy is serious about. Tara Strong jokes. Yes. I love Tara Strong. I've made jokes about a few other voice actors so far, like George Newbern, Rob Paulson, and Juliet Landor. I'm glad people are picking up on them. Just a little side note for us readers, don't let it slip your mind that the title is I Wanted What I Saw That Day. Could that day be next Saturday? I think you're actually the first person to comment about the title. I've been wondering what people were speculating about it. June, Year 3, Part 1. What? Oh, yeah. We finished Season 2, like, a month ago, Gwen said. Ah, wasn't it amazing? Lucy asked. Gwen smiled as she watched Lucy's reaction on her laptop screen. Yeah, we both thought the whole show was great. Definitely could have used a 3rd season. I know. Can you believe it ended like that? There's so much more they could have done with the new team, the old team that came back, and the new villain who showed up for like 5 seconds at the very end. Totally sucks that they got cancelled. Gwen and Lucy were getting caught up with another video chat. Since Lucy was going to be coming back to Bellwood in a few months and the two of them would be going to school together this time, they felt it was a good idea to get reacquainted. It had been quite some time since Lucy's homestay with Gwen, after all. One idea they'd had was to suggest some of their favorite shows to each other, and they had plans to binge watch a few that neither of them had seen once Lucy arrived. In addition to TV shows and the like, Gwen and Lucy were keeping each other up to date on all their other hobbies as well. Did I tell you I got my black belt recently? Gwen said, more than a hint of pride in her voice. Wow, cool. Congrats, Gwen. Lucy said excitedly. Did you have to climb up 80,000 steps to a temple in the Himalayas and challenge an old wise master for it? Gwen laughed. Nothing that difficult. I just had to demonstrate everything I'd learned and do some endurance tests. What about you? What else have you been up to lately? Well, I got to put some of my pottery on display at this local youth art exhibit thing my town has, which was pretty cool, Lucy said. What? Pottery? Yaha. I didn't know you did pottery. Yeah. It's fun. You can make all kinds of stuff out of clay. Did I not tell you I started doing that? Lucy asked. Gwen shook her head. Ah. Well, it was one of our art class options at my school. I took it because I thought it would be funny, like, the clay girl making clay things. Lucy giggled. But it was actually really neat. Ha. Well, that's impressive. I'm really happy for you. Lucy smiled appreciatively. Thanks. She tilted her head to the side, noticing something behind Gwen. Have you played all those? She asked, pointing. What? Since Lucy was pointing at her computer screen and not at her camera, it wasn't clear to Gwen what she was referring to. Oh, Gwen said, turning around. There was a small stack of video games near the TV behind her. Not yet. She kept speaking as she got up and crossed her room to retrieve the games. Ben lent me some of these. I haven't tried them all yet. Oh. I know a few of those, Lucy remarked as Gwen held them up for the camera. You're gonna love 'em. Really? Have you ever played? Gwen sorted through the stack of games until she came to the one she'd been playing with Ben recently. This one. She said, holding it up. I got it not too long ago. Lucy leaned closer to her screen to take a look at it. Nah, she said with a shake of her head. I don't play a lot of shooters. I like RPGs and fighting games mostly. It's not really a shooter, Gwen explained. It's sort of a survival horror thing, and it's actually got some really clever puzzles and stuff. Well, I'll have to try it out after the move, then she said. Is it co-op? No, it's single player. Ben and I have been switching off, though. Gwen chuckled. He and I really don't do the co-op thing very well. Lucy giggled. Nonsense. Once you kill each other a few times to get it out of your systems, I'm sure you guys would cooperate just fine. Gwen laughed, putting the game case down and looking through the others. How is Ben, by the way? Lucy asked. Gwen had told Lucy about Ben and Julie's breakup already, but they hadn't discussed it at length. He's doing all right, I think, Gwen said. I think the worst part for him is going to school, when he has to be around Julie. He's gotten a few bad grades recently, and sometimes he seems a little down when we meet up right after school. But he's usually a lot better by the end of the day. Lucy nodded thoughtfully. He's lucky he has you. Gwen blinked. I guess. Since Ben's breakup, Gwen had been trying to cheer him up and help him get over Julie whenever she could, but she wasn't very comfortable with taking credit for it. What about you? Lucy asked. What? Gwen wasn't sure what Lucy was asking. How do you feel? About Ben's breakup, I mean, Lucy clarified. I feel sorry for Ben. You're not glad? What? Gwen asked, shocked. You think I enjoy seeing him suffer like this? Why would I be glad? Gwen asked, hoping she was misinterpreting the question. Haven't you missed him? Lucy's tone of voice was more concerned than accusatory, but Gwen still wasn't sure what she was getting at. Well, it's not like he's been gone or anything. Gwen said, not entirely sure how to answer. I know, but you've had to share him with his girlfriend, Lucy pointed out. Share him? What do you mean by that? Gwen asked nervously. Something about Lucy's wording made that statement feel uncomfortable. Well, you used to hang out with him every day. Then he started dating Julie, and you didn't get to see him as much. Aren't you glad you get to see him every day again? Lucy further explained. Gwen didn't respond. She looked away from her laptop and hung her head guiltily, not wanting to think about that. If I were happy about my cousin getting dumped, that would make me a pretty terrible person. Gwen, it's okay, Lucy said reassuringly. There's nothing wrong with missing someone you love. Gwen lifted her head up. Her face felt hot. Pfft, miss him. Heck, any amount of time with that doofus is too much. I've got half a mind to find him a new girlfriend just to get him out of my hair. Lucy giggled. Well, in that case, why don't you put in a good word for me? After all, I'm single too, and as long as Ben's back on the market. Lucy smiled suggestively, raising her eyebrows. Lucy. Still gross. Gwen flinched away from her laptop. Lucy giggled again. I'm only joking. Except, not really. Gwen rolled her eyes. The two of them sat in silence for a moment before Lucy gave Gwen a nervous smile. Well, however you feel about Ben, I think seeing each other more often is good for you guys. Gwen took a deep breath. I am happy to be around him this much again, she admitted. He's my only real friend around here. And I don't have to hide anything from him. Lucy smiled warmly. But don't tell him I said that. Gwen demanded, looking embarrassed as she glared at her. Lucy put her hands up. I won't. A devious smile spread across her face. But that means I don't have to tell you what Ben says about you. What? What does he say about me? Gwen asked frantically. Lucy simply giggled. Phew. Ben walked in the front door and went to lie down on the couch. He'd spent the whole afternoon with Gwen, but his mother had told him to be home for dinner. He could tell he was on time since he could hear his mother in the kitchen, moving pots and pans around as she made something. Deciding to kill time until dinner, Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, but as he took it out, he pressed an icon on his home screen by mistake, opening up his picture gallery. Oops, Ben said. He moved to close the app, but it finished loading before he managed to do so. A picture of him and Julie popped up on his phone screen. Oh, he said out loud. Of course that would happen. Sighing to himself, he closed the app. The entire afternoon, he had managed to avoid thinking about her. Lately, he'd been trying to do that whenever possible, but he could never stop himself for too long. He only ever managed it for long stretches of time when he was with Gwen. If he was in school or sitting around bored with nothing to do, Julie would pop into his head pretty much every few minutes. But when he was with Gwen, something about her just kept his mind from straying, allowing him to focus on the fun he was having. That was partly why he'd been spending as much time with her as he could lately. This feels really familiar. He thought back to earlier in the year. Before he'd asked out Julie, he'd tried doing the same thing to get over his crush on her. Spending time with Gwen was what had kept him sane, and now that Julie had broken up with him, he'd fallen back to Gwen for support once again. Ben looked down and realized he was clutching the locket Gwen had given him. Lifting it out of his shirt, he opened it up and looked at the picture of them inside, causing him to smile gratefully as he remembered the day she'd given it to him. I wonder what this protects me from anyway. He remembered Gwen had said something about a protection charm when she'd given him the locket, but he'd never seen it glow, or project a bubble shield around him, or do anything particularly magical. Maybe it protects me from cavities. Or stubbing my toe. Whatever it did, Ben definitely felt safer when he held it. At the very least, it was a reminder that Gwen was always there for him, which he really needed right now. Ben. Carl. Dinner's ready. Ben's mother called from the kitchen. Quickly stuffing the locket back under his shirt, Ben stood up. Although he pretty much wore it at all times, he'd still somehow managed to keep his parents from finding out about the locket so far. He wasn't worried about them figuring out it was magic or anything, since it didn't look magic as far as he could tell. As usual, it was more about the embarrassment he would suffer if they found out how much he cared about a birthday present from his cousin. "So, where've you been all day, Ben?" his father asked him as he joined his parents at the dinner table. Unlike Gwen's parents, Ben's parents normally gave him a lot of freedom when it came to going out of the house. He never had to ask their permission or tell them ahead of time. He didn't have a curfew either, although sometimes they told him to be home in time for dinner. So when they asked him where he'd been, he knew it was only out of curiosity and to make conversation. Just studying with Gwen, mostly. Even though his parents let him do what he wanted, he still had to lie about some things. They really had studied for a little bit, but he couldn't tell them they'd also spent some time sparring in the woods using his Omnitrix and Gwen's magic. "That's nice," Carl said. Sandra gave her husband a look like she was expecting him to say something else. When he didn't, she asked Ben a question. "Have you spoken with Julie much lately?" Ben stopped eating. He'd already told his parents about how Julie had broken up with him, but they hadn't pressed him for details yet. "A little," Ben said. He decided not to specify how little. In the month since their breakup, he'd spoken to her maybe 2 or 3 times. Her friends still talked to him now and then when Julie wasn't around, but he never sat with them at lunch anymore. In some ways, things were back to the way they were before all this started, with him having no friends at school. Ben's parents glanced at each other, and his father shrugged. "Don't you think you should talk to her more?" his mother asked. "After all, it would be nice if you two could still be friends." Ben knew his parents must have liked Julie. While they were dating, he had usually tried to avoid having Julie and his parents in the house at the same time, since his parents were guaranteed to embarrass him. But they had met her a few times, and they knew she'd been helping him with his schoolwork. Perhaps they felt she was a good influence on him or something. "I will," Ben said, not looking up from his plate. He hoped his 2-word answers and lack of eye contact would let his mother know he didn't want to talk about it. As he ate, he considered the prospect of being friends with Julie. From what he'd heard, couples who broke up were normally supposed to hate each other. He certainly didn't hate her, and she didn't seem to hate him either. But even without hating each other, he just couldn't see them ever being friends again. He sighed, unconsciously gripping his locket through his shirt. "At least I still have one friend." "So, what do you wanna do today?" Gwen asked. It was the weekend, and the school year was nearly over. Ben and Gwen didn't have much schoolwork left to do, so they had the entire weekend to themselves. Currently, they were lounging around in Gwen's living room. Gwen was reading a book, and Ben was playing a game on a portable system. Ben had showed up at her house before noon, and since then, they hadn't really done much. They still had most of the day left, and Gwen was bored. "Let's fight crime," Ben suggested. Gwen turned to look at him. He was laying on the other couch, and he hadn't even looked up from his game. "Seriously?" she asked. "It's mildly infuriating that I can't tell with him." "Duh." Ben put his game down and turned to face her as well. "We gotta get ready for the summer. We've been sparring." "Yeah, but that's not the same. We gotta get used to fightin' real bad guys." The kind that won't stop just short of killing us. Gwen shook her head. Bad idea. If Grandpa finds out, he won't be happy with us. So he won't find out, Ben countered. Besides, it's not like we haven't done it before. Gwen thought back to the few times they'd done some heroing in Bellwood. A few bank robberies and burning buildings here and there, plus that time a swarm of megorots showed up in town. Well, those times the town needed our help, and we happened to be there. We can't just go out looking for danger. Why not? Because then we might find it, doofus. Ben shrugged. Danger usually finds us first, anyway. Not in Bellwood. Yeah, but that's what makes Bellwood so boring, Ben insisted. Isn't that what makes our summer trips so fun? There's more to our summer trips than that. I know, Ben said. But it's not like you don't love the action and adventure, too. Gwen inhaled and sighed deeply, rubbing her temples. Not now. I'm just saying, even if it's fun, doesn't mean it's not dangerous. You're such a dweeb, Ben said, holding up the Omnitrix. Besides, I'm dying to use this thing again. I don't know if I can wait until summer. Oh, get real. You use it all the time, Gwen pointed out. You just used a bunch of your aliens against me last time we sparred. But I mean really use it, Ben said. This thing right here, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. It made me into a superhero. So I need to do some real heroing, or it's like I'm wasting this gift. Gwen glanced at the watch, then rolled her eyes. Here he goes with another Omnitrix rant. Fine, she relented. We'll turn on the news. We see any stories about a crime in progress, we go out and fight bad guys. All right. Ben cheered, grabbing the remote and flipping on the TV. The local news was boring. They watched it together for about 5 minutes before deciding to go back to what they'd been doing, although they kept the news on so they could still vaguely listen to it in case anything good came up. But after almost an hour without any crimes to report, Ben got frustrated. Oh, come on. He complained. What, does our town have the laziest criminals in the world? Rob a bank or something, geez. Well, maybe they're not dumb enough to go around committing crimes in broad daylight, Gwen pointed out. Also, it's kind of a good thing that we live in a low crime rate area. Yeah, Ben said, waving his hand dismissively. They kept the news on for a while longer. Just when they were about to give up and go do something fun instead, there was some breaking news. Apparently, someone from the next town over who was wanted for armed robbery had been spotted in Bellwood and was now at the center of a police chase. Perfect. Ben said excitedly. Gwen gave him an unamused look. Seriously? I mean, looks pretty dangerous. Hopefully we can do something to help. As he spoke, he started flipping through the aliens on his Omnitrix. Knowing he was already looking for XLR8, Gwen rolled her eyes. Just gimme a minute to put on my lucky girl costume, she said, heading upstairs to her room. Upstairs, Gwen closed the door and locked it before stepping over to her closet. She reached inside and pulled out the superhero costume hidden in the back. Glancing nervously at the door, she laid out her costume on the bed and began to undress. For some reason, she felt really uncomfortable taking off her clothes with Ben in her house, even though he was in a different room and the door was locked. The last time they'd gone on one of their superhero outings, she'd changed into her lucky girl outfit while he was outside waiting for her, but something felt different this time. She had the irrational fear that he'd somehow walk in on her. She shook her head to clear away those thoughts, but when she started to put her costume on, she ran into a different problem. It was too small for her. What the heck? Gwen tugged on the tight black pants, but she was unable to get them on. She felt like she'd just worn this recently, but when she thought about it, she realized it had been more than a year since the last time she'd needed it. How on earth? She tried stepping towards her mirror, but she tripped on the costume wrapped around her ankles and fell over. Ow! Gwen kicked her legs free and stood up, screaming internally. Frustrated, she scooped up the costume and stepped in front of her full-length mirror. Holding her costume in front of her like she was shopping for a new outfit, it was clear that it wasn't the right size for her. Have I really outgrown this? She asked herself. She hadn't thought of it, but she had grown a lot in the last year. She'd had to throw out a lot of her other old clothing too. It should have been obvious that something she'd worn when she was 10 wouldn't fit her anymore. Just as Gwen let out a sigh, there was a knock on the door. Gwen. What's taking you so long? Ben called from outside her room. Don't come in. Gwen shouted desperately. I cannot let Ben see me like this. I'm not coming in. Ben called back. I know how to knock, dweeb. Shut up. Gwen's momentary panic subsided as she reminded herself that the door was locked. Just give me a minute. Blushing hard, she went to put her regular clothes back on. You still haven't changed yet? Ben asked incredulously when Gwen finally opened the door. I thought you were putting on your lucky girl costume. It doesn't fit me anymore. Gwen nervously toyed with her hair, trying not to meet Ben's eyes. Is it the same costume you had when you first started being lucky girl? Ben asked. Why yeah, Gwen said, walking past Ben and heading down the hall. Well, that's not really surprising, I guess, Ben said, following after her. You've grown a lot since then. What do you mean by that? Gwen snapped, turning on the spot to shout at him. Whoa! Ben leapt back. I just meant you've gotten taller since then. I wasn't, saying you were fat or anything, I swear. Oh. Gwen looked thoroughly embarrassed by her outburst. That's what sorry. She turned back around and walked down the stairs. My height. He just meant my height. Downstairs, Gwen went back to the living room and sat down on the couch, and Ben came in after her. You okay, dweeb? Ben asked as she turned the TV back on, checking to see if the car chase was even still going. I'm fine, Gwen said immediately, but she wouldn't look away from the TV. Feeling self-conscious, she grabbed a blanket from beside her and covered herself with it. Are you sick? Ben asked. I said I'm fine, doofus, Gwen repeated. She knew she was acting weird, but she couldn't help it at the moment. Well, okay, Ben said. What about the news? How are things going? Ben's voice cracked, and he stopped talking to clear his throat. Gwen turned to look at him with an amused expression on her face, then laughed lightly. Hey! Don't laugh. Sorry, Gwen apologized. She wasn't actually trying to make fun of him for it. Guess I'm not the only one who's growing. Hearing Ben's voice crack reminded her of that, and it was somehow comforting to her. Even though she'd just put it on, she shrugged off the blanket, trying not to feel weird about any of it. But anyway, about the car chase, Gwen said, getting back to the matter at hand. It looks like it's already wrapping up. Even if we leave immediately, we still wouldn't get there in time. On the TV, the news was showing where the suspect had crashed his car into a fence before getting out and trying to flee on foot. "Oh, man," Ben moaned. "I coulda gotten him before he even got out of his car." Ben walked over to the other couch and fell onto it, sighing dejectedly. "Guess we're gonna have to find another way to prepare for the summer trip." Gwen had an idea. "I know something we can do." "Yeah. What?" Ben asked. "Let's go visit Grandpa," Gwen suggested. Ben smiled. "Hey, yeah. We haven't seen him in forever." Ben and Gwen knew how to get to their grandfather's trailer park, so they quickly got ready to leave and headed out the door. "Wait," Ben said once they were outside. "What is it?" Gwen asked. "Ah, it's Grandpa, remember? Maybe we should go eat lunch before we head over." Gwen shuddered a bit. "Good idea," she said. "Burger Shack." "Sure," Ben agreed. As they started walking next to each other, Gwen couldn't stop herself from comparing her height to Ben's. She'd always been the taller one, at least by a little. It looked like that might still be the case, but it was hard to tell. They'd both gotten taller. "He really has grown." "Stop. I'm glad to see that the fandom is not completely dead, and that most of us readers are all, or somewhat, grown up, since Ben 10OS was our childhood." "Best story." "Thanks. I was actually expecting this fandom to be mostly dead too, so I've been pleasantly surprised to have this many readers giving me this much feedback. And that the ending of this part everyone. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel, and also tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.